If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
Campers, hikers, and wilderness explorers, what are the scariest paranormal, strange, or creepy creature encounters you've had deep in the woods or forests?
Skinwalker / rake in the driveway. So this story happened to my brother the other day, and it's got me freaked out. To start off, we live in GA, in the boonies right next to the Alabama line. So woods all around. I don't live with my family anymore, but my brother still lives at home. If you know him, you know he is a very serious person. He's very private, doesn't draw attention to himself, and is just, serious. It was around 11:30 at night, and where they live, it is pitch black with no streetlights in the woods. He's never experienced these creatures, but I and my sister have. Despite never having seen them, they have relentlessly pursued us. Either way, he pulls up into the driveway and parks in his usual spot, on a tiny but steep hill, opens the door, and turns on his flashlight to be able to see. But as soon as he got out of the car, he sensed that something was wrong. He heard a sound that was different from the usual outside noises. It was something moving near him. So he turned the flashlight to the edge of the driveway to see two pairs of reflective eyes shining back at him. He said the two creatures were on all fours with freakishly long limbs. They didn't have hair, just pale white skin. They were tall too, standing at about his shoulder on all fours, and he's 6 feet 2 inches. He reported that they remained motionless, but he didn't linger long to explore the situation. He said he screamed and ran. Then our dad went out there with the gun to kill whatever it was, but they were already gone. He texted me right after it happened. He knows I'm into that sort of thing, and he has never been. He didn't even know how to describe what he saw. But I sent him that one picture of a rake, probably fake, but I wanted to see if it looked similar, and he said, yes, that's precisely what I saw, but the limbs were a lot longer, they were taller than that. Chill, you all. He didn't even believe in any of that till this. I'm low-key kind of jealous he got to actually see that and I didn't. We lived out in the sticks, in the foothills of the Sierras. I was in high school at the time. I was walking down the hill from our neighbors. There was a small copse of trees, and as I entered it, I heard a man's voice calling for help. It sounded like it was coming from about 50 yards away. I froze. I knew there was no way anyone would be on our property. It was all privately owned. There were no trails. Anyone would have had to use someone's driveway and go past their house. I just stood there. Then the voice changed. It became a woman's voice. That's when I knew it was something bad. I stayed still. I wouldn't even look in that direction. Then my friend's dad came down the trail behind me to ask me about something, and the voice stopped. I thought for a minute that maybe he'd been playing a trick on me, but the voice didn't come from behind me, and the second voice definitely sounded like a woman. I never liked going out in the dark alone when we lived there. Repeated occurrence. Last while away at sleepaway camp I had a paranormal experience that began with seeing odd flashes of light in the sky, and then while out in the woods at night and even in an open field, I had multiple encounters with a 7-foot-tall all-black figure, who occasionally had white eyes, and someone else who was there with me when he attempted to pull out a switchblade claimed it had red eyes, although I am not sure how true this is. This creature stalked me and 2 other campers, and even a counselor who helped us through this. I only came across it while walking outside at night. I thought I was crazy, of course, but even in the full moon, when you would be able to see details, it was still very obviously inhuman. It would watch from afar occasionally, and if we would stop and stare or even notice its presence, it would hide itself behind trees, bushes, etc. Most of the time, the all-black figure was still very much visible, and at least I could always feel when I was being watched. This all happened about a year ago, and it basically drove me to my breaking point. I have contacted the other people who saw it several times, begging them to tell me the truth of what happened so I could just come to the conclusion I'm insane and what we saw was not real. At this point in time I have distanced myself from them and text them only occasionally. In a lot of ways it just felt like a weird camp thing. A lot less scary when you're not in the moment. Tonight, while looking out the window to close the blinds, I saw random flashes of light again. It isn't hot enough for it to be heat flashes, and I haven't seen anything like that since last summer. To be honest, I want to cry. I was trying to be reasonable and consider the fact that nothing like this has happened in a year, so why would it happen now? Also, considering I am at my house, inside, 4 hours away from when I saw stuff like that last. I basically brushed it off and was completely fine until I heard deep, raspy groans. I don't know how to explain it, but it sounded like a really bad imitation of a cow, definitely scarier. I tried to ignore it, considering it could be normal sounds from the woods surrounding my house, but it was getting closer to the point I knew it had to be coming from my backyard. I learned the hard way curiosity killed the cat, so I locked my windows and put down the blinds, but I was just wondering if I should be more concerned about this. This took place in the past hour, and I am just very concerned that this stuff keeps happening. I am not very superstitious, I am attracted to the unknown, but tonight I was just chilling in bed, and it's like it was begging for my attention. Anyways, if anyone has answers, that would be great. I was showing my now ex the area where some of my family lives, just outside of Yosemite. We got there pretty late, but I wanted to see the stars. We didn't find a good spot, so we started driving home. On the way, we saw this woman on the highway in this small town, in the middle of the night, in the dark, crying quite loudly. I was concerned, so I asked him to turn around. He argued with me a bit, saying hell no, but we pulled around anyway to see if she needed assistance, and she was gone. Only two options were that she could keep walking the highway or go off into the woods. Creepy. Familiar voices from the woods. Okay, so this happened almost a week ago. I forgot something in my car in the driveway. I jog out to get it around 10 p.m. I've lived where I do since 2002. Across the road is the farm I grew up on. So I know the animals here and the sounds they make. The road was quiet, with no traffic. Never any pedestrians. I opened the door to my car to get what I needed and heard a voice say, "Hey, babe." The voice, from about 8 to 10 feet away, sounded happy enough. The voice bore a striking resemblance to my ex, a person I haven't seen in a decade. For half a second, my brain wanted to see where it came from. Then something else told me to get back in now. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got closer to the door and turned around to peer into the dark. If someone was trying to get my attention, they'd have called again. Immediately told my wife about it. Went back out armed and with a flashlight. All I could hear was silence. My ex doesn't even live within driving distance. So that rules it out. I'd rather it be a cryptid than her. It's still bugging me. It wasn't a fox. It wasn't a bobcat, not a coyote. I just remember my grandmother, who lived on the same land, telling me, anytime somebody calls your name, don't follow the voice, come back home. Old Appalachian legend being repeated, or did she tell me something from experience? My father had never remembered her talking about it, nor does he remember anything like this. Leroy ghost? I was talking with my stepmom about late-night driving experiences, and she told me about an encounter she had in Leroy, Montana, on a road trip from Washington to North Dakota. She was on Route 87, and she was running low on gas. The Fort Benton exit had a lot of construction going on, and she couldn't see any way to get to the gas stations from the exit ramp, so she got back on the highway. After a while she saw an exit sign for Leroy, Montana, and it said there was gas and food available. She took the exit and saw another sign reading Leroy 5 miles. At this point they had no service and were relying solely on an atlas. The road took them through a dark wooded forest, and after a while, my stepmom realized the odometer had gone up 15 miles and they still hadn't found any sign of a town, but she kept driving and waited for her friend, who was holding the atlas, to say something. After a few more minutes, her friend spoke up and said she thought they passed Leroy somehow, and my stepmom agreed. They found a fat shoulder to turn around, and as they were pulling off to make their turnaround, they both had an image flash into their heads. A man, standing in the middle of the road. Neither of them actually saw him in real life, but both could describe the man in exact detail. He was tall, with a brown flannel, and what looked to be a scythe, broken in half, with the handle wrapped in a white, bloody cloth. He also had a thick scar across his forearm. While that by itself is weird enough that my stepmom planned never to go anywhere near the place again, for the next 8 months she received frequent phone calls from Leroy, Montana. After my own research, I've come to find out that Leroy is a ghost town unmarked on maps unless you specifically search it up. I and some friends have already planned to go to Leroy over spring break this year and see if we can't find anything. Sharing this here to see if anybody else might have seen or heard of anything similar in the area or any insight as to what might have happened. Something that happened to me when I was a teen. I have experienced the eerie feeling, dead silence, lack of wind, and getting lost in the woods before. I believe that something else, not just our human instinct, triggers the overwhelming fear. The strangest experience I have had occurred when I went for a walk down a path that led to the woods near my home. I had gone there many times. I could walk it in my sleep. I knew an off-trail path that would lead me to a nice open field. Huge footprints were found in the mud a couple of days earlier. I didn't have a smartphone back then, but my boyfriend at the time witnessed the giant tracks. It was similar to a wolf print, Except I could probably fit my feet in their 2.5 to 3 times the length. Hands down the biggest prints I ever saw in my life in the woods. Well, I was walking alone this time in summer weather. It was a beautiful, perfect day. I walked to the opening by the field and stepped out into the light. I felt immediately extremely uncomfortable. I remember thinking, this is what deer must feel like when they are paralyzed with fear. This is what it means. I see now. I instantly shoved away the choking fear, but only enough to move. I remember my dad telling me that it is paralysis in fear that leads to death in circumstances. I picked up a rock. I stepped into the field more. No wind. No sound. No more birds. Absolutely nothing. Then what pierced the silence? I have goosebumps right now as I'm typing. I heard a very loud growl. I thought I was going to die. I really did. So I stopped. I calmly took a breath and looked around. The growl was so deep and loud that I thought it would have to be as big as a bear, if not bigger. The weirdest thing was I could not locate the direction of the growl. It was so loud somewhere in the direction I was facing, but the entire other side across the field bellowed the growl equally. The whole woods growled at me. I thought, I am not welcome here. I set the rock down beside me. I quietly said, I am sorry. I will leave. I am not welcome here. I turned around and walked where I came from with every hair on my body standing up. I had a feeling that running may trigger a chase I could not outrun. As I approached the woods I came from, I thought about any tree I could possibly climb really quick if something did start to come at me. No tree had any low branches. When I got into the woods more, you betcha I hauled ass and never went back again. A girl in a forest. Let me tell you my story. I've shared it somewhere on the net before, but it didn't get much attention. I was a teen, and it was around 2006 when I went to the forest for a run. I was jogging along a narrow path, surrounded by low shrubs. The forest in that area was sparse, that was just an edge of it. I heard a rustle behind me and turned around but saw nothing. It was probably some animal in the bushes. I was quite jumpy back then, so it was normal for me to keep looking over my shoulder. I looked ahead, and maybe 20 meters in front of me, I saw a girl. She was facing away from me and walking in the same direction I was running. I could swear she hadn't been there a second earlier. I remember exactly what she looked like: shoulder length, dark blonde, wavy hair. She was wearing jeans, a red blouse, denim suspenders over it, and a cream-colored shoulder bag, the same kind half the girls in my class used to have. In other words, she looked completely normal and dressed like any girl at the time. I stared, surprised. The rustling lasted for maybe 2 or 3 seconds before I heard another sound behind me, prompting me to instinctively turn around again. When I looked ahead, the girl was gone. When I reached the spot where she had been just seconds earlier, there was no sign of her. The trees there were small, thin, and widely spaced. There was nowhere she could have hidden. Nothing like that ever happened to me before or since. What did I encounter in the Maine woods? I'm an 18-year-old girl who grew up in rural Maine and still lives here, though in a slightly different location, today. As a kid, my family and I lived on a solid chunk of land in the middle of the woods, close to the East Coast. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my brother and I began to hear our mother loudly calling one of our names to come inside. However, it sounded as if her voice was coming from above or behind the house. And, not only would we never see our mother outside on the porch, but when we would go in to check, she would be confused and say she hadn't called for us. The pattern continued a long time, and we became used to it. Additionally, we often heard strange noises in the woods, and I sometimes noticed a bad smell that seemed to have no origin among the trees. The creepiest experiences then were when, without warning, the woods would go eerily silent. Animals can now explain all this, and I have learned to ignore it. The only thing I could never ignore was the sudden, overwhelming feeling of terror and the sense that someone was watching me. Whenever this happened, I would run inside as fast as I could without looking behind me. This too could be attributed to something normal, like a little kid getting scared or being anxious when in the woods alone. Then, when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I can't remember which, I saw something. To provide context, I will describe my front yard. On the right side, there was a large lawn featuring a couple of trees and a small swing set, with a forest behind it. On the left side, there was a small strip of grass followed by more woods, which included a couple of walking trails. Fall had arrived, leaving the trees mostly bare and the ground blanketed in dead leaves. I was playing by our swing set sometime in the late afternoon/early evening when I heard a crashing noise, like a bunch of branches being broken, from the woods on the other side of the driveway. When I looked, there was a polar bear behind the first couple rows of trees, walking slowly on a walking path. I could clearly see the white coat glinting in the sunlight. Obviously there aren't polar bears in Maine, but me being a kid who loves animals thinks, oh my god, a polar bear? I need to go see, so I run over to where the path opens around the side of the trees. There's only a couple of seconds where the polar bear is out of sight, as I'm rounding the corner of the woods right before the path. But when I get there, I'm faced with an explosion of leaves off the ground and a turkey gobbling hysterically and charging toward me down the path. I was so confused that I ran backwards to avoid being hit, and then I ran inside to tell my mom and brother. Obviously, my family did not believe me when I said, I saw a polar bear, and it turned into a turkey. To this day, there are occasions when I will encounter an animal, and I'm brought back to that day and to that feeling of dread and being watched. It's not often, and only when I'm alone, driving at night or outside taking care of our chickens when no one is home, but there will be an animal that isn't quite right. It's usually a deer, once a fox, and it will either stand and stare at me in a way that's uncanny or sometimes just watch me from afar, cock its head, and then run into the woods nearby. It looks normal for the most part, but there's just something very off, especially in its eyes, and I don't know how to describe it. Every time, I get this sickening fear, like true bone-aching terror, as if I am facing down my death, and it's a feeling I have only ever experienced in these situations. Here is some context that may or may not be related. People I know still randomly call my name when I'm alone. I still often hear odd crunching, whistling, and tapping noises when in the woods. And there has been a phenomenon throughout my life, to a point even my friends and family have noticed it, where nothing bad will happen for a while, and then suddenly, usually 2 to 3 times a year, exactly 3 horrible, often life-changing, things will happen in my life outside of my control. I often feel like something in those woods attached itself to me, but to be honest, I've never been a big believer in the paranormal, so I don't know that much. I really just want to know if anyone has any idea what this could be. It was 2005, and I was camping in a remote area, in the only small patch of woods for miles. I had spent the day walking to this location and hadn't seen a single person. I set up camp, started a little campfire, and heated some tinned food. I got into the tent around 11 p.m. and had been lying there for about 30 minutes when I heard a phone ring right next to my tent. The Nokia ringtone abruptly stopped halfway through its jingle, as if someone had silenced it. I sat there frozen for a second, as apparently there was someone a foot away from me outside. I unzipped the tent and peered out with a torch, only to discover that no one was present. The complete absence of sounds, including footsteps or rustling leaves, was surprising because the ground was covered in dry leaves. I had good visibility around me, yet I found it strange that I hadn't seen the person. I did sleep that night. I ended up tying some string from the zip of the tent entrance to my toe, thinking if anyone tried to open it, I would wake up. Nothing else happened, and I left early the next morning and went home. I think there is something in the woods. I, 19, live in a rural area. I've got neighbors, and we're all stacked close, but I'm surrounded by woods. I walk in them regularly and love it there. In fact, I even walk them at night, but only with my dad. But lately I've been getting terrible feelings. I am a paranoid person, and it took me a while to feel comfortable walking in my woods, but once I did, no one could stop me. But like I said, lately I've been having terrible feelings. We have a trailer that we go in at night. It's a fun girls thing we do. Go out to the trailer, watch TV, and get facials. It's not too far from my house at all. I'd say barely 20 feet. I could throw a stone at my house from the trailer. That's a saying, isn't it? We then enter by walking through the garage and using the back door, but it's important to note that the garage and house aren't connected, allowing me to see out into the woods. I've been getting this feeling that I need to run. That my exposure to the woods is causing something. I feel it deep in my gut, and I can't control the urge to just run. I can't begin to describe the strange rush, the fear that grips me and leaves me nauseous. It wasn't often before, but now that I'm outside after dark, mostly going inside to grab something by myself, it happens every time I'm alone. I need to run, and I could pin it on my anxiety if it weren't for tonight. It's ironic, but it's stormy tonight. I love storms almost as much as I love the woods. It's late, or maybe early since it's 12, but anyways, I'm on the second story of my house, and I'm staring out of a south-facing window, and down there are the pig pen, the trailer, and the garage. I'm sitting there enjoying the storm when I hear the pig squeal. It's singular, so I'm not too worried, but I look down, and I can feel something is there. It's instinctual. I know it's there, and it knows I'm there. I genuinely cannot explain the fear of something bigger, stronger, and faster staring at you. I can't see it, but I feel it. I close the window and head to my room, where my sister is snoring next to me. I'm too wound up to sleep, Every noise sends me jerking. What should I do? My girlfriend and I went dispersed camping in Flagstaff and had a really weird experience. Hi all. I and my girlfriend decided to head up to Marshall Lake in Flagstaff, Arizona, to do some dispersed camping. It was lovely during the day, but when the sun set, we put out the fire and went to the tent because it was so cold. The moment the sun went all the way down, we were lying in our tent and getting ready to get some sleep even though it was early. Keep in mind we were in the middle of nowhere with no one nearby, probably 1.5 miles from the closest tent we saw. 30 minutes into lying down, I and my girlfriend heard two very distinct footsteps right behind our tent. We didn't hear anything walk up, and it was so close we grabbed our bear spray and decided to poke my head out of the tent to see if anything was nearby. Absolutely nothing. We go back to our sleeping bags pretty spooked, and then 15 minutes later we heard it again, and we decided we didn't feel safe and left. We hiked out of the woods and got a motel. Are there skinwalkers out here? Because we saw no animal tracks behind our tent, and we know for certain I heard footsteps around our tent. This happened tonight, and it was a full, very bright moon. I don't know if that makes a difference. I don't know anything about skinwalkers and didn't even begin to believe in them until now. Later, we heard someone unloading shots at something at 1.2 during the night. We believe it was from the campers 1.5 miles away at the head of the trail. I found it strange that someone fired only one magazine and did not fire any more rounds. But as we hiked back out about an hour later, they also packed their camp and left as well. Finally, we safely got all of our gear and got out of there and home safely. Please, everyone, be safe camping or hiking around Flagstaff. English is my third language, so I got help to translate my experience. Here it is. It was a quiet afternoon, and we were gathering wood on the other side of the river. The elders had warned us about the area, saying it was an old cemetery from the 1800s and 1900s. Of course, we didn't believe them. I never believed in ghosts or mythical creatures. There were 12 of us in total, and we believed that splitting up would help us complete the job more quickly. So, I decided to head off with two of my friends, leaving the main group behind. As we walked deeper into the forest, we heard the distinct call of a bird. It was the kind of sound locals associate with the presence of an aswang, a mythical creature in Filipino folklore. One of my friends suddenly froze and refused to go any further, saying he was sure he had heard the aswang. My other friend and I laughed at him, mocking him for being scared. Feeling embarrassed, he decided to turn back, leaving just the two of us to continue. About 15 minutes later, as we ventured deeper into the forest, we stumbled upon an old grave. The tombstone bore the date 1898. I remember thinking that the elders were not joking after all. But we didn't have time to dwell on it, we were in a hurry and still far from where we needed to be. And that's when it happened. A sudden gust of strong wind blew through the forest. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a massive, dark figure. Even now, I can still picture it vividly. It looked like a bear, but it wasn't. Its glowing red eyes locked onto us, staring unblinkingly. I froze. My friend froze. I whispered, "Do you see it?" He nodded, his voice trembling, "I see it." For a full minute, we stood there, completely still, staring at the creature. It didn't move, and neither did we. Finally, I grabbed a rock and threw it at the thing. It didn't even flinch. My friend then picked up a larger stone and hurled it with all his strength. That's when it moved. The grass where it had stood didn't sway until a few seconds after it bolted away. It was as if it had teleported. We didn't wait to discover where the object went. We ran for our lives, tearing through the forest until we reached the others. Even now, I still think about that creature. Whatever it wasn't normal. The way it moved, the way it stared, it still haunts me. It wasn't deep woods, just a patch of wildlife reserve in the middle of suburbia, but every time I visited, I felt like something was watching me. Naturally, I told my spooky-minded friends about it, and being bored teenagers, we decided to go wander that patch of woods one night. One guy went on ahead as the rest of us walked more slowly. I started to feel the presence, and it definitely felt like it wanted us to leave. I don't remember if anyone else felt it, and we stayed, plus that guy was up ahead on the path somewhere, and we lost sight of him. And then the feelings cranked up into a wave of intense pressure and anxiety. I felt like my head was in a vice. The other girl stumbled and almost fell when it hit. We were all freaking out and yelled for the guy who wandered off to get back at once and ran back to the car. The interior light was illuminated. It hadn't been on when we left it. The doors were all firmly shut, but I don't remember if they were locked. Wander guy turned up wondering what was going on, because he hadn't felt a damn thing. We pushed him into the car. I got it moving, and we left. After we told him what we'd experienced, he was like, "Oh, huh." I didn't feel anything, so I challenged the spirit to come out and fight me. The crooked man in the woods wants me to join him. Growing up, I spent a lot of time living with my grandma at her place. Now, for context, my grandma did not live in a house. She lived in a cabin in the middle of the woods, completely off-grid on a multi-acre property. No power, no water, nothing. There was a generator that we would use for about an hour a day to use basic amenities and whatnot, but for the most part it was dark and cold. Living off-grid also means there are no bathrooms, only outhouses. So, that being said, any time you needed to use the restroom, you had to walk a pretty long distance from the cabin to the outhouse, about a football field's length or so. During the daytime, it's not a problem at all. You can do it, and it's not as intense. However, at night is a different story. One night while I was staying with her, I had woken up desperately needing to pee. Usually if I needed to go in the middle of the night, she wanted me to wake her up so she could walk me, but I was feeling independent, or as independent as a 10-year-old can feel. I quietly got out of the bed and made my way to the door, grabbing a flashlight as I went. I started walking through the dense woods to the outhouse when I heard a branch snap in the distance. Now at this point I was already deeply regretting not waking my grandma up to walk with me, but hearing an animal or something walk not 40 feet from me scared me so bad I froze. Immediately, my mind assumed it was a mountain lion or another aggressive animal, but when I directed my flashlight towards the source of the sound, my heart shattered. There, standing less than a rock's throw away, was a person. I was completely frozen in place, not being able to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a normal person, something was wrong, very wrong. Their face was contorted into a vile grin, teeth bared and neck tilted. They stood in an unusual manner, with a wide stance but hunched shoulders and a tilted neck. It looked unnatural. At this point I'm not even sure I was breathing. I remember the flashlight in my hand shaking so badly that I couldn't tell if the figure was moving closer to me or if it was just a trick of the light. And that's when it started to beckon me. Its contorted body began moving its arm, trying to summon me to it. It was like watching someone try to beckon their pet. And while it did this, its grin widened impossibly, and its head seemed to fall even more to the side, almost at a completely inverted angle, like its neck was broken. I was horrified. It was at that moment that the fear seemed to shake the shock from my body, and I broke into a full sprint. In classic horror movie fashion, I tripped and dropped my flashlight, but that didn't stop me. I bounced off the ground and continued to run for my life, blasting through the front door so hard I fell to the ground inside the cabin. My grandma awoke to this and came sprinting inside to see what the hell was going on. Breathlessly, with tears streaming down my face, I said nothing and just pointed. There, outside, with the flashlight beam perfectly illuminating it, was the crooked man, still beckoning me with its hand. My grandma's reaction to this was honestly the scariest part. She seemed utterly unaffected and proceeded to open the front door, much to my screaming disapproval. She walked down the front porch, into the dark, and began yelling at the man. "I told you to leave, you're not welcome here," she said. Not moving on is one thing, but scaring my granddaughter is my last straw. "Leave before I make you leave." And with that, she came back into the cabin and locked the door. I stood there in complete shock. "Grandma, why is that man at your house?" I said it with fear, still riddling my body. And her response made my body run cold. "He used to live here, but he died. He can't seem to move on, even though he chose to leave this world." I was floored. "How did he die, Grandma?" I asked. And my grandma, the ever so honest woman she is, told me exactly how. "He hung himself in those trees over there, and that seems to be where he stays." About a decade ago, I was in the woods doing some training with two friends. All three of us are ex-military. Once finished with the drills, the other two decided to start hiking back out to the cars, about 4 miles from the little camp we had built. I decided to stay on, as I was enjoying sharpening my knife and fancied some solitude before the walk. Now is probably the time to mention that these woods are deep off the beaten track, and almost no one goes there apart from our little group. The locals actually believe that the woods are haunted, but we were unaware of this at the time because we were all newcomers to the area. About 10 minutes after they left, and I was sitting there at peace with the world, I heard laughing and giggling. Children's giggling. It seemed to come from literally all around me. Now, I'm not green as grass, and I'm not the type to get scared, but something about it was absolutely bloody terrifying. It just had a presence about it, and I felt eyes on me, something or somebody was watching me, and I knew from gut instinct that to be the case. I threw my kit into my day sack, held my knife, and announced loudly that it had made its point and I'll leave now, and I'll let it go about its business if it lets me go about mine. Just at that, the laughing stopped. Dead stop. The eerie feeling remained just as intense. I quickly left the trail. In the decades since, friends have seen full-body apparitions in that area. One captured a fairy on film and put it online, and I've also had other experiences. Now, rip the piss, but I promise you, the woods can be extremely strange places, and no mistake. Native reservation camping experience. Last July, around the 4th of July, I and my family went camping on the Luiseno reservation. There were 7 of us total, and I was the odd one out, so I slept alone in a tent. For whatever reason, my family had my tent on the outskirts of our camping area and not too close to them, which was near the river that flows throughout the area. Every morning for 3 days I was awoken at 4:53 a.m. to the sound of someone or something walking outside of my tent. The sound of footsteps was slow, and they seemed to be walking in circles around my tent. It was still dark outside, so I was never able to see anything or anyone's shadow. The walking would go on for about 10 minutes until it would abruptly stop. I was naturally terrified because I was alone and not close enough to the adults if something happened. After the first night this happened, I told my family, and they gave me a knife for if someone were to try and come into my tent or something, but that honestly didn't comfort me as much as I wished. A few months later I was watching a video of someone at the same camping res, and when I was scrolling through the comments, I saw a comment from a woman saying she loved the scenery, but she swore she felt spirits. I messaged her and asked her what had happened, and I was absolutely shocked when she told me her experience, and it was almost the same as mine. She was also by the river. It was her and her young daughter in the tent, and in the early hours of the morning she heard something slowly walking around her tent for about 10 minutes until it abruptly stopped. I worked summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tents. I and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, and cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. After the kids have gone to bed, Mike and I are lounging by the water, enjoying a cigarette, and simply spending time together before we decide to retire to our tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as camp counselors, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that were trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond and quite frankly shitting myself, I responded by telling her that they were fine and she had to leave. "That's good." She turned her kayak and paddled off into the night, just as expected this time. At this point in time, Mike and I were legitimately very creeped out not only by the appearance of this mystery woman, who resembled a freaking corpse, but also by her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later, SHT started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids in the same age group. She sent me a text that read something along the lines of, "Hey, Sean. Stop screwing with us. This isn't funny, my kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. I was around 8 to 9 when this happened. But since I have moved away, I still think about this incident and wonder. My pawpaw was 57 years old when this happened. An avid outdoorsman, grew up hunting and fishing and did it his whole life. Once I was old enough, my pawpaw started to take me hunting and fishing, and I loved it. I clicked with it immediately. From then on we were always together, hunting with me by my pawpaw's side, him teaching me along the way. Learning how to identify tracks, calls, and trees. Needless to say, he knew the area and was well experienced for it. One day we went hunting. The drive felt like it took forever. Endless curves and twists of the Tennessee mountains make me sick to even think about that road. Once we finally arrived, it was nothing but trees and gravel. No houses, no streetlights, just nature. We walked for around 10 minutes and sat down above an old logging road. After sitting there for a couple of hours in complete boredom, we finally see a doe walk down the road. I was shaking lol. My pawpaw draws the gun on the deer and takes the shot. The deer drops. It was a great moment for us, our first deer together. We took our photos with the deer, field dressed it, and started dragging it back to the truck. As we're dragging it back to the truck, we hear coyotes behind us yelping, very close. My pawpaw urges me to move quicker, then all of a sudden the most ungodly screech/yell I've ever heard in my life comes from the bottom of the hill. Below us, it instantly struck fear into the younger me. I look to my pawpaw and notice his eyes got wider, and I ask, "Pawpaw? What was that?" He would also teach me the calls of various animals, and he would say, "Boy, I've never heard that in my life, it's time to go." To this day, I'm not sure what or who made the sound, but seeing my pawpaw worried and not knowing what it was enough to make me feel incredibly scared. Thanks for listening. I never really believed in skinwalkers until now. I've heard stories of skinwalkers and other things, but I never really believed in them. I always figured they were just folklore and scary stories to make things interesting, but the other day I was on top of a hill in a wooded area at my home, just walking, trying to clear my head, and I heard a guy yell out, "Hey!" to me, so I yelled back, "Yeah?" and nothing. I figured it was an echo from a house nearby and moved on, but a few minutes later I heard it again, this time closer and maybe 50 yards away at most, and it yelled, "Hey!" So I yelled back again, "Yeah?" and nothing, but I kept staring, and I don't know why, but my mind instantly said Skinwalker, and everything went so quiet and still, no wind, no highway in the distance, nothing. Dead quiet. So I walked home, and next time I'm bringing my gun, lol. I could be wrong, and it could be an echo, but it may be a skinwalker or something else. Could be a ghost or demon. I do believe in ghosts since my house is haunted, and I've seen, heard, and felt them touch me. The camping experience has disturbed me to this day. A couple of years ago, I and a buddy were camping out on a little island at a lake way out in the country. The only way to access this island was to climb over an old broken bridge for cars that was halfway in the water. Anyway, we had camped there multiple times in the past and got our tent all set up and got a fire going quickly before dark. Once it got pretty late, maybe 11 to 12 p.m., we were sitting around the fire enjoying a meal we cooked on it when we both saw something weird about 20 feet from our campsite that made us both freeze and stop talking. There were two white lights side by side moving up and down. They looked like not flashlights, just orbs of light, more like. We both stood up and started shouting out, "Who's there?" with no response. This was making both of us extremely nervous because if this was a person, why wouldn't they respond to us? But after calling out, the lights started moving around the entire edge of our campsite and then started moving toward the edge of the woods very quickly and completely still. If this was a person holding a light, I feel like it would at least move or jiggle a little while they were moving. But these lights were almost just gliding through the air, and they moved right through the water and up a massive hill with no pausing or changing directions until they were out of sight. We both immediately packed up our tent and got the hell out of there because it spooked us pretty bad. Still have no idea what this could be. Strange experience in the woods. Hello, everyone. I want to share an experience that happened to me a few weeks ago. On a warm night, I decided to go for a walk in the forest to my favorite clearing. It's a beautiful spot, located on a hill with an amazing view over a field and into the distance. I've watched a few sunsets there, and it has always been one of my go-to places. There's also a campfire there, which seems to be used occasionally by others. I left my apartment around 2200 hours and headed toward the forest. The night was pitch black, but I chose not to use a light. I wasn't sure why, maybe I just didn't want to attract attention and preferred to enjoy the quiet warmth of the evening. As I walked, I passed an old farm next to the road leading to the clearing. The road itself connects to another town nearby. I had passed that farm many times before, and I had never seen any animals, people, or cars around it. It always seemed abandoned to me. But that night was different. As I walked past it, an unmistakable farm animal smell hit me, something I had never experienced there before. It was that typical earthy, musky scent you get when animals are around. Instinctively, I looked around, hoping to spot something in the darkness. But just as always, the place was completely empty. There were no animals, no signs of life, and only a strong smell lingered in the air. I found it strange, but I shook it off and continued walking. Soon, I reached the clearing and sat next to the campfire, ready to stargaze. That was my whole purpose for coming. I wanted to lie under the sky and take in the stars. When I inspected the campfire, I noticed that beneath the ash, some embers were still glowing. There was also firewood stacked nearby, left by whoever had been there before. I decided to rekindle the fire, using the leftover wood, and soon, I was lying on the ground next to it, watching the stars. For about 2 hours, until midnight, I enjoyed the peaceful night. But eventually, I ran out of firewood. I didn't feel like venturing into the woods for more, so I let the fire die out and allowed myself to drift into the quiet darkness. Then, suddenly I heard footsteps. They were coming toward me from the gravel road, loud and distinct in the silent night. The fire had burned out completely, and the moon was dim, leaving everything in near total darkness. I couldn't see them, and they couldn't see me. But as I lay there on the ground, hidden by the darkness, I listened closely and tracked their movement by sound alone. As the footsteps passed me, I got up and started following them. It wasn't strange to me at the time. I was heading home, and they just happened to be going in the same direction, toward my town. If anything, I felt a strange sense of advantage. They didn't know I was there, but I knew about them. Their footsteps remained steady, crunching over the gravel, and I could hear my footfalls joining theirs. Then, without warning, their footsteps vanished. Just gone. I stopped, confused. I didn't really think much of it at first and continued down the road, passing the farm again. But something nagged at me, so I paused, turned around, and waited, expecting to see someone emerge from the darkness behind me. Maybe I had somehow passed them without noticing? In the near total blackness of the forest, it was possible. But no one came. I stood there for a while, staring into the darkness, waiting for movement, a sound, anything. But there was nothing. No footsteps. There was no sound of rustling in the trees. There was no indication of any presence. And that's what unsettled me the most. If it had been a person walking ahead of me, they wouldn't have known I was there. That means if they suddenly heard another set of footsteps behind them, it would have startled them. If they had jumped off the road into the woods to hide or escape, there should have been noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, etc., but there was nothing. I didn't think about it too deeply until a few days later, when I replayed the whole scenario in my mind. The more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. Now, I don't know what to make of it. Saw a woman camping and now experiencing things at home. Last weekend, my wife and I took our 2 sons camping, along with my oldest son's girlfriend, into the woods. We were camping for the full weekend. It was a fun time, but the last night, I woke up with an urge to go check out our surroundings. I felt uneasy. I woke up and noticed my sons weren't in their tents. I started walking, calling their names, and they were on a trail ahead. They also said they had an urge to come out. My wife and my son's girlfriend were in the tent still. We were a little ways down the trail, and the water was probably half a mile ahead. We kept walking, just talking now that we were up. As we got closer to the water, I heard someone talking, very faintly. My sons heard it as well. As we got closer, there was a young woman, maybe in her late teens or early 20s, very dirty looking, and she was crying. She was sitting on the ground near the water. I asked my sons to wait, and I went up to ask her if she was okay. She glanced at me, uttered a word in a language I couldn't comprehend, and with a single blink, she vanished. My sons witnessed the whole thing as well. I was shaken up along with my sons, unable to explain what we witnessed. To be honest, I'm a skeptic, and I wasn't even sure what I had witnessed was paranormal, even though there was no other way to explain it. We left early the next morning, and there were no signs of anyone else out there with us. I had been having dreams of this girl since I saw her. 2 nights after our return, the house felt freezing despite the temperature being set at 75 degrees, everyone noticed it. Our dog was acting really weird, jumpy, and less friendly. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even think that it could be paranormal. A few nights after we got back, my wife and I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. Assuming it was the kids, we didn't check at first, but then when they didn't stop and it sounded like it was only going up and down the hallway, I checked it out, and no one was there. The footsteps didn't happen for a few more nights, but then later on in the week they happened again. Then Saturday night my son's girlfriend woke up and was screaming because she said she saw a young girl staring at my son, her boyfriend, next to his side of the bed, and then she was gone within seconds. Her description matched what we had seen. I've been Googling the area we camped at and finding nothing that matches what we had seen. I've been researching non-stop and have finally came out. Ha! Advice? My girlfriend and I love to take late night walks. We decided to go to this beachy area near my house in the Netherlands. It's not really a beach at sea, just a large lake with a beach next to it. I love to go to this spot to have fun with my friends, and it's a very common place for people from my city to swim there in summer. There's a bar and a terrace where you can order food and drinks and everything. Normally this is a very chill spot. That's what I thought until today. It was around 10:30, and we just watched a movie. As I said, we love to take walks, so we did that after. First you have to walk through a small bit of forest, but nothing scary, just a normal asphalt road with here and there a small cabin where people live. As we approach the beachy part, we sit on a bench and just chill there for a while. We stand up again and walk further along the water. We take a right and walk again. In a radius of about 200 meters from every part of the beach is a large forest. We were just walking and walked past a few tents along the way, as people love to go camping there. As we approach the end of the beach, we suddenly hear a loud, manly scream and cry coming from the distance. It sounded like someone who was having a proper mental breakdown. As a normal reaction, my girlfriend didn't like it much, and neither did I. We took a 180-degree turn and walked straight back. Every 5 to 10 seconds or so, we heard the manly crying and screaming, which echoed over the entire lake. We estimated that we were about 500 meters away from where we first heard the sound, so we decided to sit on a bench again. Suddenly we heard it again. This time, the sound grew louder. It was coming closer. The screams and cries kept on coming closer to where we were sitting, so naturally, we took a run for it. The path leads back to the extended asphalt road. In between the beach and the forest is a large open field. As we stop running and start normally walking, the crying becomes fainter as we are moving further away. But every time we stop, it keeps coming closer again. We figured it was walking the same road as we were. As we walk faster and faster back home, I take one last look back, and I suddenly see this tall figure wearing all black stumbling out of the shrubs and small trees along the road. The screaming and crying was something I've never heard before, and I've never actually seen or heard someone produce that type and that much sound. It sounds like a scene from a horror film. The figure then stopped walking and just stood there in the middle of the field, still crying. We sprint as fast as we can back to my house. Once we enter the more populated area, we see a man cycling toward us, going in the direction of where we just came from. I decided to inform him about what we just saw and heard. He, too, responded with a 180-degree turn and cycled straight the other way, which I fully understand. It's now around 2.5 hours after, and I still can't get the sound out of my head. I didn't know what or who it was or why it was there. I first thought I should go towards the figure to see if I could offer my help, as it didn't sound as if it was having too much of a good time. I didn't want to take the risk, as it could be someone who could cause serious harm, was on drugs, or maybe had weapons on him and could have harmed the first person who crossed his path in an attempt to take out his anger or sadness on someone. I'm now home, lying in my bed. I want to forget what I saw and heard, but I just can't. This is all real. I swear on every person in my family. About 6 or 7 years ago, a friend and I were on our way to visit another good friend of ours, who had moved to a small town for a teaching job in a state high school. All of us grew up in the same seaside state capital, and the small town in question is about 120 kilometers of bad road, curvy and slippery, from it. It's very scenic, though, as it goes through hills and a natural reserve. I can't remember much of the trip per se, but it doesn't matter. I was driving, and we hopped onto the highway that goes inland. Rain was pouring down, and we were listening to Black Flag while talking about music when I stopped at a gas station because the gas was going low, and this friend and I were kind of charmers, so we started some small talk with the cashier, and I mentioned we were going to São Bonifácio. The cashier then mentions a shortcut through a dirt road instead of the usual highway, citing that it would cut 30 minutes short of our trip, but it wasn't safe given the weather conditions. I emphasized that it was raining hard. But we were both idiots, and, at the time, drunk idiots, so we kept an eye on the entrance and took the shortcut. It was a rocky road that cut through the Atlantic forest, probably illegal, since it also cut through a national park. Due to the heavy rain, it was especially rocky and muddy, so I had to keep a steady speed of about 5 to 10 km/h in a Ford Ka 2015, mind you. There was not a single light in sight. Not a house, not a street light. Only the car headlights showing nothing but water pouring down and a disgusting, horrible road ahead. We were joking about when the rain stopped, and my friend said he wanted to take that chance to take a leak. So I just stopped in the middle of the road and told him to hurry up. He then covers his shoes with a pair of plastic bags from the beers we bought and goes to the front of the car. I honk a few times just for the duck of it, to take a few laughs out of the situation, and he moves a little forward where the headlight doesn't hit him. It took the time to light a cigarette to hear him kind of exclaim, sort of yell in fright, like when you are taken by surprise by something. The guy ran back to the car, slipping and falling on the ground and ducking up all my passenger seat with his muddy pants, slamming the door. Then he looks at me and says he saw what he believed was a mountain lion, or a susuarana, as we call it here, and that I should slam the ducking gas and get the duck out of there. I could not do that, since it would duck up my car's suspension. Instead, I turn off the music, we wait a little, and nothing happens. After about 20 seconds, we both see a huge, and I mean a huge, figure move between the trees. About 2 meters tall or so, and we could not see much, only black fur and eyes that reflected the car's headlight. As fast as we saw it, the thing went left, back to the woods. I think I speak for both of us when I say we were absolutely frozen and ecstatic. To this day, I still don't know how I could remain calm enough to start the car and slowly drive away to our friend's place. We told him about it, and he said it was probably a mountain lion still. But the ducking thing was 2 meters tall. And I swear I could hear its steps as it ran away, despite the windows being closed. Dad woke me up at 4 a.m., scared of a ghost. My dad moved into a house in the middle of the woods about 2 years ago, and I moved in with him soon after to help him get around and take care of the house and whatnot. Side note, it's an old house on land that Native Americans heavily inhabited. In the South. Honestly, this house is really weird. The first night I spent here, I was woken up by a woman whispering, "Is anyone home?" right next to me as I was about to fall asleep. My dad didn't believe me when I told him the next day. It's taken a while to get used to living in the deep woods, but something about this property is off. There've been more than a few times when I've actually felt a heavy presence. Almost like someone is standing right behind me. I have a cat who I rely on to alert me when there's someone approaching my room, and there have been times when he's alerted me but nobody was there. Other times he stares at the same corner of my room, with an expression that tells me he can see something I can't. There have been more times than I can count where I'll be leaving a room and a cabinet will slam, or it sounds like something was moved behind me. It sounds silly, but it's odd enough for me to notice. I've mentioned it to my father, but he didn't think much of it until early this AM when he woke up and went downstairs to find the basement flooded. Somehow, the shower in the basement was turned on, and the drain had been clogged. Neither of us uses the shower in the basement. He's now fully convinced there's a ghost in this house. I don't know, if you ask me, I think it's more than the house. I get that feeling even when I'm out on a hike. I always leave food scraps and leftovers out on the tree line for the animals and sometimes coincidentally find little treasures in the same spot. Almost like I made a trade with Mother Nature. Once I left strawberry cake leftovers out and the next day found a stone with a pink crystal formation. Another time I found an arrowhead carved out of stone. Just thought I'd share. Definitely the weirdest thing I've ever been through while hunting/harvesting wild ginseng deep in the woods of NC. I've never experienced anything like this in my life. It was like late July or early August of 2016. I live in a rural area of western North Carolina, pretty close to Tennessee. As a hobby, I like to dig/harvest ginseng that grows wild in certain areas of the mountains. Earlier that day I had run into somebody I knew from town who also digs ginseng, so I told him I was about to head out and go see how my luck would be that day. I told him where I was going, and he informed me that he had planned to go close to the general area I was talking about, but he would be much further up on that side of the mountain. I tell him, cool, maybe I'll bump into you in there. It was unlikely, but you never know. To get where I was going, all I had to do was cross the creek from my house and start walking up. It was going to be about a 45-minute hike of pretty steep ground to get where I wanted to start looking. I get in there. Start finding ginseng. But as time went on, things got weird. I start hearing these real distinct, pretty sounds, knocks on wood. Like a carpenter working with boards. It came to my mind that there was actually some remodeling going on down the road from my house, but there is no way that's what I'm hearing. I'm too high up and too far away. This sounded fairly close. Time goes by, and I get the strongest sense that I'm unwelcome. That I'm on somebody else's territory. Out of nowhere these bad vibes started coming in. But I was finding ginseng, so I was dealing with it. Then the hooting. It's pretty common around where I'm from if you're in the woods with somebody and the two of you get separated. Find each other. You would call for one another by imitating an owl call. I start hearing something hooting at me. I can tell that it wasn't an actual owl. It was too artificial. So I'm thinking it may be my buddy I ran into earlier. He's heard me or seen me from way off. So I hoot back. Nothing. This goes on and off for about an hour and a half. I'm never getting a direct response. I'm not seeing anyone. The habitat that ginseng likes to grow in leads you to some of the most beautiful woods, and to admire this natural beauty, I had taken a couple of videos with my phone whenever I had stopped to rest. I hear another hoot. And immediately after, I hear a massive tree come crashing down below me on that side of the mountain. I'm thinking whoever's been hooting at me is dead by that tree falling. I hurry to the edge of a small cliff to look off below where the sound came from, and there's nothing. No trees were moving, no leaves had been stirred up, no branches were broken or anything. I'm freaked out. Halfway joking, trying to calm myself down, I yell out, "Are you dead?" Silence. I look up above me on the side of the mountain, and I see a large ginseng top, so I hurry up there to go dig it. As soon as I bend down, I hear the hoot again. It sends chills down me, and I know I'm getting out of there. I run as fast as I can off the side of that mountain, and I'm surprised I didn't die from tripping up and falling. That night, sitting on my bed, I'm looking at the videos I took, and something catches my eye. So I screenshot it. I called up the old boy I ran into earlier who said he was going to be in there where I was, and he told me he had ended up going to the other side of the county. I don't know what it is I'm looking at in this photograph I took, but what I would describe it to look like is this. The bottom thing looks like a weird gray-skinned creature with a head, arms, and shoulders hunched over with a spear in its hands. Above that I see what looks like an Indian chief's face or a woman's face in the leaves of the trees. Beats me, people. I just know there are things out there we can't put a finger on that are real. It's beyond us, and we won't ever know for sure. I'm not sure what my dog and I heard or saw last night. For context, I live about 30 minutes out of the city. I reside in a wooded area. The nearest neighbors are about 2 to 3 miles down the road. Could have very well been a human, who is a lot scarier to me, but I'm not so sure. I thought I'd share here, as it felt very paranormal and made my hair stand up. My dog's cry at the back door woke me up last night. I look at the time, and it's about 3:30 a.m. I think to myself, that's weird, as he never needs to be let out at this time. I get up, turn on the porch lights, and let him out. He was hesitant to go outside when I open the door, which is unusual behavior for him. I watch as he runs over to the back fence and starts barking. This wasn't his normal bark. He sounded and looked very much like Cujo. Alarmed, as I've never seen him that distressed, I open the door and call out to him to come back inside. That is when I hear it. Whistling. It sounded like someone whistling a song. I don't see anything at this point, but am still freaked out because I'm not sure who the hell would be on my property at this time, let alone at all, really. I'm desperately trying to get him to come in, but he's fixated on whatever he's barking at. I run to the kitchen to grab his treats, hoping to bribe him inside. I come back to the door, and I hear someone or something barking back at my dog. The voice was high-pitched. It sounded like when a human barks like a dog. If that makes sense. I look towards where the noise is coming from and can barely make out what look like glowing eyes staring out of the forest. The whistling starts again for a moment, and as soon as I shook his treats and called out to him, I heard a very loud and deep growl. Not from my dog. It didn't sound human either. That noise sounded like a very mad, very large animal or something. My dog comes running in the door, straight past me and his treats, right into his crate. I slammed the door and locked it, brought him into my room with me, and barricaded us in there till daylight. I could reason the growling to be a bear or mountain lion, but what was the whistling and human-like barking? Not sure what that was, but it was enough to scare my dog to the point where he was trembling and panting. He's a German Shepherd, and he's a big, brave boy. I've never seen him that upset. I, too, am terrified and hope that never happens again. Thanks for listening, and if anybody has experienced something like this, please share in the comments. My paranormal experiences in Croatia. Hello, I recently discovered this channel, and the more I listen to people's paranormal experiences, the more I feel the need to share my own. I never really talked about it outside of my family, and even then, they didn't believe me. But after seeing similar stories here, I figured this might be the right place. So, here it is, my encounters with something unnatural deep in the forests of Croatia. I spent a lot of time at my family's vacation house in Turopolski Lug, a remote, swampy forest in Croatia. The house is completely isolated, sitting by a river deep in the woods, with the nearest small town about 20 minutes away by car. My dad built it in the late 90s, and since we lived in Zagreb, it became our weekend escape. When I turned 13, he bought me a dirt bike since the forest was full of trails, and there were rarely any vehicles around except for the occasional hunter. One night, my friend Tony, who's from the town nearby, and I were riding through the woods when we came across this strange Egyptian-looking monument, just two large poles standing on either side of the trail in the middle of nowhere. We had been riding for at least 30 minutes into the forest, so we stopped there to rest and talk for a bit. The forest was alive as usual, filled with the sounds of crickets, frogs, and owls, but as we stood there, I started noticing something odd. The noise was fading. Little by little, the forest grew quieter until there was nothing. No crickets. No birds. Just silence. Before I could even mention it to Tony, we heard something that still haunts me to this day, a high-pitched, unnatural scream, almost like something starving and angry. It was distant at first, but it echoed through the trees, cutting through the silence like a knife. It didn't sound like any animal I knew, and something about it felt wrong. Without hesitating, we jumped on our bikes and sped out of there, not stopping until we were far from that spot. I questioned Tony about the situation, but he dismissed it, stating that it was likely a bear. But the way he said it, quickly, like he just wanted to move on, made me think he didn't really believe that either. When I told my parents about it later, they just laughed and said I was imagining things and that it was probably a bear, just like Tony said. About 3 years later, I had another encounter, and this time, it was worse. I was riding alone at night, going deeper into the woods than I had planned. It was completely pitch black, and the only thing lighting my way was the dim headlamp of my bike. I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going until I realized I had gone too far, further than I had ever been alone. Just as I was about to turn back, it happened again. The forest sounds disappeared. A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. It was exactly like last time. Then, before I could react, the scream came again. But this time, it was louder, closer, and more aggressive. I felt my body freeze, my hands gripping the handlebars. My bike was still running, idling beneath me, but I was too terrified to move. I started scanning the darkness around me, my eyes flicking back and forth, but I couldn't see anything past my headlamp. The forest was just a wall of black. Then, I heard a man's voice. "Is someone there?" It was coming from somewhere in the trees, just beyond the reach of my light. My heart was hammering, but for some reason, I felt the need to respond. "Hello?" I called out. The voice responded immediately. "Hello." Something about the way they said it made my stomach drop. It didn't sound natural. Like they were mimicking me. It went from a mature man's voice to a younger adult's voice. I swallowed hard and forced myself to ask, "Did you hear that?" There was a pause. Then the voice answered. "Heard what?" That was enough for me. I twisted the throttle, and the bike roared to life as I tore out of there, not daring to look back. I was unsure if something was behind me, and to be honest, I preferred not to find out. When I finally made it back home, I told my parents again, but they just rolled their eyes and told me to stop making up stories. I still don't know what I encountered in those woods. But whatever it wasn't an animal. It was definitely not human. Since that day I have never been to the woods with my bike after dark. I tried looking into Turopolski Lug's history and any paranormal reports, but I couldn't find much detailed information online. There are definitely eerie elements tied to the area, like the old wooden chapels, which are part of Croatia's rich sacral architecture. Some of these chapels date back centuries and are linked to earlier religious and some other weird practices. As for the strange lights, shadows, and eerie noises, these kinds of stories are common in forest folklore worldwide. Turopolski Lug is home to numerous mystical legends, such as those of the Black Queen and Baba Roga. A lot of what makes the place unsettling comes from oral traditions and personal experiences, which may never have been formally recorded. Still, after what I've experienced, I know for a fact that something is out there, even if I can't explain what. I don't know what I saw. But it charged at me. So last night, I'm having some brews with my homie. Around 10:30, we head down to my local park. Typically during the day we'd go to this trail behind the park that is open to the public. Aftering out and talking with a normal vibe, we had to go piss, so we decided, let's just go down to the trail entrance since it's dark and enclosed and piss down there. So we're walking, and as we're in the entrance area, we walk a little bit further into the trail but close to the entrance. We are feeling a very normal vibe, laughing and continuing drinking. Although I remember it being a little ominous when looking down the completely pitch black path into the full trail. We didn't notice, but it was completely, Oddly quiet. Out of nowhere, my best friend hear this brushing noise, like tree branches moving. And we instantly look down the path where it's coming from. And it is as if some creature is darting towards us as fast as possible. I see the dirt from the trail being lifted into the air and non-stop speeding steps towards us. I was freaking out, thinking it's either a person running towards us as fast as possible or it's some animal. I just had no idea fight or flight kicked in, and me and my homie felt cornered and weirded out that it was non-stop running towards us. I instantly turned around with my friend, and we ran out as fast as possible. Now, maybe I'm lost, but I'm from Cali, Long Beach area. What animal rapidly and randomly runs towards two humans barely talking loud in this little trail? My friend didn't see the dirt up in the air like I saw, but he saw something dart at us and heard the brushing noise too. It was too far from us to make out, but if we stood around 10 more seconds, we would have found out, and we didn't feel like sticking around for that since it literally was running towards us. Any thoughts? Creepy camping experience. I went camping with my girlfriend and another friend this past weekend in the Appalachian Mountains at a well-known lake camping area. We found a place in the back because many spots were already taken. We got there when it was almost dark, set up our tents, started a small fire to cook hot dogs, and went to sleep after the fire went out around 10:30 p.m. Girlfriend and I were in one tent, and our friend was in the other tent by themselves. I fell asleep first and then woke up around 12:30 to the sound of some type of animal howling/screaming very loudly in the distance. It wasn't a dog, coyote, bobcat, or owl. But it sounded different. I eventually drifted back to sleep. Then I woke up to what I swore was our friend leaving her tent to use the bathroom and walking around outside. I could hear what I thought was someone walking on some of the rocks and maybe a tent zipper or something. Fell back asleep. Then I woke up again and thought that it was around 6:30 a.m. due to it looking like there was a little bit of light outside. Like the sun was just getting started to come up. And finally, here's the best part. Around 4:25 a.m. I wake up freaking out. Screaming as if I'm being murdered. I have never felt like that or had this happen before. My feet were touching the end of the tent, and I swear I felt something touching my feet from the outside of the tent, but I also felt like something was on top of the tent pushing it inwards on me. I screamed and swung for like 5 seconds extremely loud. At that point, my girlfriend became extremely anxious. I then had to calm her down. She explained that the howling earlier in the night had freaked her out, and she was experiencing strange nightmares that prevented her from sleeping. Every time she fell back to sleep, it was the same nightmare. We mutually agreed that now we had to check on her friend because she probably thinks we just got murdered. We sat quietly, seeing if we could hear something or someone walking or breathing near the tent before I exited the tent. It was pitch black outside. I cut the flashlight on and exited. We checked on her friend, who was okay. At 4:40 a.m. we were packing everything up and out of there before 5 a.m. Our friend never went outside of her tent to pee because she said she was scared. Then what did I hear? Did something attack me? My girlfriend also woke up at one time and thought it was getting light out. What the hell is going on? Super creepy. 10/10. We'll probably go camping again. I know if I were a camper nearby through the woods, I would have been freaked out hearing my bloody murder scream at 4:30 a.m. Does anyone know what I experienced? I can't even really categorize it. My friend and I were both Border Patrol agents and roommates at the time of this story. We were working out of southern Arizona at the time, and we both enjoy the outdoors. He has mountain climbing and camping experience from various locations around the world. I have camped and hiked throughout the U.S., gained some hunting experience in Florida, and felt comfortable being in the remote wilderness, often alone. Chiricahua isn't very remote in my experience, hardly the most out of where I have been. We went to the Chiricahua National Monument area 5 or so years ago for an easy hike to take in the scenery. Apparently the hanging rocks and vistas were pretty nice. The hourglass-shaped hanging rocks were the most distinct part of the landscape. We arrived and had both brought our service handguns, which we habitually did off-duty. We then hiked about an hour down the trail away from one of the parking lots. There were many rocks as well as small outcroppings, grottos, and caves. It was partly cloudy when we arrived, but clear enough for the sun to shine through. We traveled for an hour along the looping trail, which was estimated to take about 2.5 hours for a round trip. At this point, it had become fully overcast with moderate fog and very light rainfall. I remember it as being particularly gloomy at this point. Still, we were enjoying the hike, although the temperature dropped considerably. Shortly after the fog came in, the last part of the bad weather change, we heard a strange set of 3 knocking noises from behind a hanging rock at the top of the gorge we were in at that point. It sounded vaguely like a heavy tool being slammed against the rock in the cadence of 2 knocks a quarter second apart, a short second delay, then a third knock. This 3-knock sequence repeated several times from that location. We stopped as soon as we heard it, and we were immediately made uneasy for some reason. After several sets of knocks, it stopped, and we started moving about 50 yards when we heard the same several sets of knocks from the opposite side of the gorge, then again from a third position that was once again above us on the rim of the gorge near some large monolithic rocks. We then had a very uneasy and frightened feeling. My friend told me something like, "Hurry up and let's get out of here, I don't like this," and we started moving out of there at a constant jog. For the next 5 minutes, we heard a few more sets of knocks from the 3 different locations. I felt very much in danger for my life for some reason. At one point we stopped at an outcropping on the rim of the gorge. We both had our hands on our holsters and did a quick look at the ridge above us. We had instinctively grabbed cover before doing so, that shows just how disturbed we were. When we made it to the trail crossroads at the end of the loop near the visitor center, we had lost the feeling of dread about half a mile back. We went to the visitor center and asked the ranger there if there were any crews working in the area or any groups of people doing something that sounded like the knocking we described. She said that it sounded like we heard woodpeckers. I played my roommate a clip of a woodpecker native to the area via online on my phone, and the sound was vaguely similar, but the tapping of the woodpecker was much faster, and it wasn't quite as deep-toned. He said, "Well, that does sound like it, we probably just heard that and got freaked out," and I didn't agree, but I felt as if it would be embarrassing to admit I still felt something very weird actually happened, so I feigned agreement. We then drove home. I learned of missing 411 many months later on a weird part of internet binge late one night. When I saw Pauline was a former Leo, I took it much more seriously and fell down the rabbit hole. I actually mostly forgot the Chiricahua incident at this point and did not connect the dots until I saw that the Chiricahua Mountains were supposedly a hotspot of disappearances when looking for any clusters around Oz. Though the National Monument area was not. I then told my friend about this when we were both home. First it was about 411 in general, and he seemed interested. I then told him the really creepy part is that the Chiricahua Mountains are supposedly a cluster. His eyes went wide, and he looked spooked. He replied, "Really?" Upset and incredulous. I replied with, "I still don't think those were woodpeckers," and he said, "I don't actually think so either. Whatever was going on, it almost felt supernatural." This was how I honestly felt inside at the time and in retrospect. I don't seem to find any evidence of this area being a 411 cluster. All I could find was a ranger who disappeared without a trace in the area. This incident haunts me periodically. I'd like to know if anyone can help me identify more specifically what happened or any folklore or established phenomenon I am not aware of that fit this incident. It's so enigmatic that when I want to tell it in real life, or if someone asks, "Have you ever had a paranormal thing happen?" I struggle to even categorize or summarize it. I would like clarification on whether similar experiences have occurred to others. What did my friend see? My friend works for a delivery company. She was driving to someone's house to deliver a package today. This happened around 1:30 p.m. That person's house was in an isolated spot, the nearest neighbor being 10 minutes away. The road she was on was surrounded by trees. The person's driveway featured an open gate, encircled by trees as well. She noticed a no trespassing sign, but because she was delivering their package, she ignored it and continued on. As she drove up to the gate, she felt uneasy. When she passed through that first gate, that feeling got more intense. She ignored it because she thought she was just feeling anxious about the trespassing sign. The trees cleared up, and it was just grass after that point. She could see the house clearly even though it was still far up and there were only 2 small trees on either side of the house. As she continued up, she eventually got to the second gate that was closed. She figured it was closed for a reason, so she got out of her truck and left the package there. As she was setting it down, though, she saw movement from the corner of her eye. She didn't turn her head or anything to see it because she said she felt like it was a bad decision to do so. All she did was move her eyes in its direction. When she moved her eyes to get a better look, it stopped running and sharply turned its head to her. At that moment, she entered her truck without looking, locked the door, and drove away. She said it looked like a person with long limbs galloping on all fours in an unnatural way. It seemed more akin to an animal than a human. I asked her if it could have simply been a horse or something similar, but she was adamant that it was a person. In her own words, she said she felt icky and uneasy the whole time on that property. This was in Decatur, Texas. What could it have been? Has anyone had a similar experience? Has anyone in Decatur, Texas, seen something like that? Something was living beneath my grandmother's floorboards. I've gone back and forth on whether I should post this. I'm not one for paranormal stuff. I've always been the it's just the wind kind of guy. But after what happened last summer, I haven't been the same. I figure if anyone would understand, or at least take me seriously, it'd be the people here. So, for context, I'm a second-generation Japanese American. Most of my extended family is still in Japan. Last May, my grandmother passed away. She lived in a very rural part of Aomori, in an old wooden house just outside Hirosaki. When no one else could make the trip to take care of the estate, I agreed to go. I hadn't seen her since I was a kid. The house hadn't changed at all, same paper sliding doors, same narrow corridors, same musty tatami mats. It was as if I had traveled back in time. It was small, dark, and strangely cold, even in June. Everything creaked. I chalked it up to age, but there was a heaviness in that place I didn't remember from childhood. It wasn't welcoming. The plan was for me to spend a week organizing, tidying up, and liaising with the real estate agent. I stayed alone. No one lives nearby. There's a forest behind the house and nothing but silence at night. Things were fine for the first few days. Boring, even. I swept, boxed up old dishes and photos, and checked drawers for paperwork. Then I found a trapdoor. It was in one of the smaller rooms I hadn't gotten to yet. The corner of the tatami felt slightly off when I stepped on it, squishy, almost. When I rolled it back, I saw a wooden panel that didn't match the rest of the floor. It had no handle, just a small notch. I pried it up with a screwdriver. Beneath it was a hole. Not a basement or storage space, just a pit. Maybe 6 feet across, with dirt walls that had been scratched raw in some places. No ladder, no lining. It was simply a plunge into darkness. I leaned over with my phone flashlight, but the light didn't catch anything but loose soil and what looked like old drag marks. That was enough for me. I closed it and moved on. That night, I heard scratching. It started around midnight. The light initially appeared as faint scrapes, resembling mice in the walls. But it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from beneath the floor. I tried to ignore it. Old house, weird noises. But the next night, it got worse. The scratching was louder, slower. Like nails dragging across wood. And then I heard something that didn't make sense, a giggle. Just one. High-pitched, breathy. Like a kid playing a prank. I didn't sleep. I decided to leave the house the next day to clear my head in town. I thought I was just getting stir-crazy. But when I came back that evening, the trapdoor was open. I hadn't touched it since I closed it. Nothing had been disturbed around it. But the panel was lifted just slightly, propped open like someone had started to come out. I sealed it with duct tape and stacked boxes on top. I didn't know what else to do. The next morning, I found a bowl of rice I had left out on the kitchen table placed neatly beside the trapdoor. I hadn't put it there. That's when I found the photos. They were in a small wooden box in the bedroom closet. Most were old family pictures, faded, yellowed. But one stood out. It showed a little girl standing in the yard outside the house. Her face was blurred. She appeared to have been smeared out of the photo, not because of motion blur. Her arms hung straight down, and her posture was weird, shoulders too low, legs turned inward. Tucked behind the photo was a note in my grandmother's handwriting. It said, "If you find her, do not speak to her. She listens. She waits." I don't know what she meant. I still don't. That night, I heard a voice. Just after 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name. The voice was calm, not shouting, but whispering my name. It sounded like a child. The child's age could have been as young as 8 or 9. Soft, like she was standing just outside the room. I didn't move. I kept my eyes closed and pulled the covers over my head like I was 5 years old again. The whispering stopped after a few minutes, but I could still hear something moving. Not walking, crawling. Hands against the wood. Slow and deliberate. In the morning, the trapdoor was open again. I taped it shut with more layers, nailed down a board from the shed, and pushed a shelf over it. I left the house that afternoon and stayed in a hotel for the rest of the trip. I didn't tell the real estate agent what happened. I didn't tell anyone. The day after, I went back to gather my stuff. I arrived early, around 7 a.m. I would rather not be there when the sun started going down. I loaded everything up fast. I didn't even go into that small room. But as I got into the car and started backing out of the driveway, something told me to look back. I don't know why. I wish I hadn't. There was something in the window. It wasn't a little girl. It was tall, almost touching the ceiling. It was positioned behind the paper screen. But the face was wrong. No eyes. The skin was smooth and pale, stretched tight, with deep, empty sockets where the eyes should have been. She wasn't moving. Just standing there, head tilted slightly, arms limp. Watching. Or pretending to watch. Then she smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too deliberate. The kind of smile someone makes when they're trying to imitate what happiness looks like. I accelerated and continued driving until I returned to Hirosaki. The house has been off the market ever since. No one will buy it. A neighbor told my cousin that people walking past at night sometimes hear knocking from inside, or see a little girl waving from the garden, even though the grass hasn't been cut in over a year. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if she followed me. But I haven't slept through the night since. Occasionally I dream of her voice, whispering like she did that night. And sometimes, it's not a little girl's voice anymore. When I was a teenager, some friends and I were investigating a country cemetery near one of our houses in Columbia, Tennessee. We wandered into the oldest section, right at the back of the cemetery, where the graves were overgrown and barely legible. There was one in particular with a headstone and footstone so close together that it must have been a child, and I got this overwhelming feeling of sadness, natural when seeing a child's grave, but I also had an incredibly strong mental image of a little girl with dark hair wearing a dress and apron that looked roughly 1860s. I didn't mention it to anyone at the time. I am very into clothing history, and I read a lot of ghost stories, so I assumed it was just my mind conjuring up a random image. As we were leaving, one of my friends turned and looked towards the back of the cemetery. She paused, staring at one specific spot, then smiled vaguely and walked away with the rest of us. When we asked her what happened, she said she would tell us when we were out of sight of the cemetery. I walked a short distance up the road, and then she revealed that she had seen a little girl with dark hair and an apron standing there for a moment before the vision disappeared. When we got back to my friend's house, I told her about my mental image and, without giving any further details, sketched out the little girl who had appeared in my mind. When I showed her the picture, she just smiled again and said, "Yep, that's her exactly." It wasn't really scary, I just hope the poor thing gets to move on. It must be so lonely and dull, especially for a child, haunting a backwoods cemetery that almost no one ever visits after so many years that your name can't even be read on your gravestone. Deepwood static. I have been playing with the idea of sharing this here because I am not sure it constitutes a paranormal experience, but it is the only one I have had. When I was going into college, I was training for Army ROTC along with a few high school friends. We decided to go hike the high peaks in the Adirondack Mountains in NY in January.
It was me and my friends D, M, and M's dad.
All of us are experienced hikers and campers. We left the car and started down the trail, hiking up Lower Wolf's Jaw. About halfway up the mountain, we made camp for the night, ate, and prepared for the hike to the summit in the morning. Even though D had a tent, he and I decided to lay down a tarp over the 4 feet of snow and sleep under the stars in sleeping bags while M and his dad slept about 5 feet away in hammocks. We fell asleep fairly easily and stayed relatively warm from our activity, until I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of crunching snow all around us, opposite the fire where M and his dad were sleeping. D was still asleep next to me when I realized that I wasn't dreaming and I was severely, like bone-chillingly, cold. Over the course of the night, the snow under the tarp must have melted and frozen, and now we were sleeping on a solid block of ice with a tarp over it. I also realized that I couldn't move anything as I was paralyzed, something that I have never experienced before or since. In my mind it felt like there were multiple beings around our site, and in only the moonlight to conjure up figures of stick figure-like beings with large circular heads peeking from behind the trees. I wasn't necessarily afraid of them. I was more afraid of not being able to move and how cold my body was. When I closed my eyes, I felt something poke into the center of my chest like a finger, and warmth began to radiate out of that point to the rest of my body and extremities. I ended up falling back asleep without reopening my eyes. After that experience, I felt like I came online, like I had become extremely self-aware from that night on. Almost like a higher level of consciousness, but I don't know if that is related at all. Eerie sounds. So I was out camping with a couple of friends and family for a couple of days, and we were having fun doing the usual camping activities, you get what I mean. On the second day of our camping trip, we covered everything outside because it was supposed to rain overnight, and then we lit a campfire. It's almost 11 p.m. at night, and I decided to go to my tent and try to sleep while my friends and family were still outside talking by the campfire. We all go to bed sometime later at 12 since it was going to rain anyways. It's the middle of the night, around 2 to 3 a.m., and I'm sleeping like a baby when all of a sudden I get woken up by the rainfall coming down on my tent, and I was annoyed a bit since I didn't want to wake up at 3 a.m., so I tried going back to sleep. Then this very loud, screeching, eerie sound started, and it was so loud I had to cover my ears, and even so, it was still very, very loud. It went on for a couple of minutes and then stopped. When it stopped, I said to myself, what the hell was that? I thought it was an animal, but there were hardly any animals near my campsite, and even if there were, it wouldn't have made me cover my ears and still be loud. Please let me know what you all think about this situation. I was walking up Kakepaku Mountain, which I had done a few times before. It was very early on a summer weekday morning, maybe around 5:36, and there were no other cars in the car park when I arrived. I had gotten to the bit before the final stair climb to the top. You pop up at the top of a small rise, and there's a bench to admire the view before you carry on. The next part is through a bit of bush, and then, from memory, you reach the steps. As I reached the rise by the bench, I had the most terrifying feeling of dread come over me. It was instant, no warning whatsoever. It literally stopped me in my tracks. I stood completely still and scanned the track ahead, but I didn't see anything unusual. It was silent, and I could only hear my heart thumping. I stayed standing where I was for a few seconds, and the feeling didn't subside. It was horrifying. Not like anything I had ever felt before. I was frozen in fear, and I had no idea why. I turned around and started literally running and scrambling back down the way I came. I didn't stop for a single second until I reached the bottom. There were still no cars in the car park when I got back, and I just ducking floored it out of there. I have absolutely no idea what happened, and it was about 3 years ago, and I swear I will never set foot there again. This is about the only unexplained sighting I've encountered in all of my years of hunting. When I was 14, around 2001, I was hunting on my family's property here in upstate South Carolina. It was a bright morning in mid-October. Rifle season had just begun. The sun had been up for about an hour, and the deer were moving well. I had seen a couple of dozen the food plot I was hunting right after daylight. After the deer had moved out of the plot, I thought I could hear someone singing. As I sat there, the singing got louder and louder, and I could hear laughing and giggling. I thought to myself, who in the hell is out here in the middle of the woods during hunting season with their kids? As the singing got louder and louder, I finally caught a glimpse of movement. I took out my binoculars to see what it was. The small field is 80 yards long, and you could see into the large pines at the end for about 50 yards. What I saw was what I first thought was a young girl walking through the woods. She was singing and laughing like she was as happy as she could be. She was just inside the tree line, and I could see her as plain as day. When I finally got a good look at her, she wasn't a little girl. She was a beautiful, dark-skinned, slender woman with long, dark, curly hair. She was wearing a brown dress and was barefoot. I watched her as she stopped right by a stump and touched it and giggled again. The stump came up to her shoulders. She was admiring and talking to it. She stood there for a moment talking to herself, then suddenly stopped. And looked around like she had an idea something was off. She glanced in my direction but did not make direct eye contact with me. After a few moments, she started humming and kind of walked and skipped directly away from me. She then turned to the right, and I lost her in the forest. As soon as I lost sight of her, the humming and giggles completely stopped. I never heard of it or saw her again. I sat there confused, but not petrified. After a few hours I decided to come down out of the stand. My curiosity got the best of me, and I went to investigate the stump I had seen her looking at. I walked over to it, but it didn't make sense. The stump that had come to her shoulders barely came up to my waist. It made no sense to me. But I saw what she was looking at. There was a wild rose bush on the back of the stump with one flower that was open. Again, this was in the fall, and it bewildered me even more. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who or what this tiny, barefoot woman was. Or why she was out there. I have hunted that same food plot many, many times over the years, hoping to see her again. But never have. I will always be intrigued by her and hope to see her again one day. Like I said before, I wasn't scared or disturbed by her, just very curious and confused by her actions and the flower. I guess I still am to this day. My friends and I used to go camping. This is why we stopped. In college I met my friends Jane, Don, and Mark. We became friends because we were all avid campers. When school was out, we would all pile into the RV Mark borrowed from his dad and go camping in a forest we chose. We viewed each camping spot as a new adventure to see new things. If only we knew what those things could be. One day, shortly before our last fall break, Jane said she was on a paranormal forum online and that some people on there mentioned a supposedly haunted forest a few hours away from our college. She didn't delve too deeply into their claims and simply thought it would be enjoyable to camp in a supposedly haunted forest. Because we were such avid campers, we decided to check it out. None of us actually believed we would see anything. We thought a guy would try to scare us, and we'd laugh. Boy, were we wrong. We spent the first day of our fall recess packing. We grabbed the essentials: flashlights, tents, food, water, sleeping bags, blankets, a first aid kit, etc. The next day we all got into the RV and made our departure. A few hours after disembarking, we arrived at our destination. When we arrived, we noticed that the parking lot was empty. At first we weren't sure if we had the right place, but after checking the RV's GPS, we knew it had to be. After we parked the RV, we grabbed our stuff and began making our way through the woods. As we walked, we could hear the occasional cracking of sticks or rustling of leaves nearby, which in and of itself wouldn't be odd if it weren't for how silent it otherwise was. No birds chirping or buzzing of cicadas. In all our time camping, we had never had a forest that quiet. The others didn't seem to notice, however, so I decided to ignore it. Upon finding a suitable campsite, Don and Jane went out looking for firewood while Mark and I set up everyone's tents. While I was setting up everyone's tents, I could have sworn I heard a whistle coming from the woods, one so quiet you could just barely hear it. When I asked Mark about it, he said that he didn't hear anything, so I carried on. Some time passed, and as I continued setting up the last tent, I heard a sudden scream of a woman coming from somewhere in the woods. Mark and I immediately dropped what we were doing and began dashing in the direction of the sound, assuming it was Jane. As we were running, the screaming suddenly ceased. We called out to Jane and began walking around in search of her. While doing this, I noticed that since the screaming had ceased, the whistling had as well. Eventually, Jane and Don shouted back to us, and we regrouped. Despite Jane appearing unscathed, I asked her if she was okay, and she said that she wasn't the one screaming. We all exchanged bewildered looks before deciding that it was probably some animal. When we arrived back at the campsite, I noticed that our stuff had been moved. One of the chairs we brought had been knocked over. Our blankets had been scattered haphazardly around the site. One of the tents I had put together was now knocked over. Mark and I exchanged perplexed looks while Don and Jane grabbed a couple of snacks and went back out while Mark and I began tidying the mess. After getting the site ready, Mark and I grabbed some drinks and sat in silence. Well, it would have been silent if the whistling hadn't picked back up, this time closer. After a couple of minutes I finally spoke. "Do you think Jane is ducking with us?" I inquired. "I don't know," Mark said in response. We sat in the whistling for a couple moments before I asked, "Do you hear the whistling?" Mark nodded awkwardly. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. Shortly before Jane returned, the whistling had stopped. I was beginning to suspect Jane was ducking with us. After she placed her collected wood into the fire pit Mark set up, he asked where Don was. She told us that they decided to split up, and for that reason, she didn't know where he went. I was frustrated by this because during one of our previous trips, Mark had gotten lost, and we had to do a lot of searching to find him. I told Jane she was stupid to split up with Don and that we needed to go looking for him when I heard Don's voice to my left. I turned and stared into the dark abyss the night had created, only for it to stare back at me. Don's voice spoke again. "It's all right, guys. I'm over here." "What are you waiting for?" "Get over here," Jane said. "I think I hurt my ankle. I can't walk. I think I need one of you to come get me." Jane and I shared a look. I couldn't see what Mark was doing, but I could feel he thought something was off. If Don got hurt, how did he walk all the way back to the campsite and now all of a sudden need help walking? And if he was already close enough for us to hear him speak at a regular volume, why didn't we hear him get hurt? Even ignoring all of those things, something was still noticeably wrong. It was definitely Don's voice we were hearing, but he didn't speak in quite the same way. The pauses between his sentences were slightly off. His inflections weren't quite right. Whoever was using Don's voice wasn't Don. It was then that someone appeared behind Jane and me. I could feel his presence before I saw him. When I turned to look at Don, he was clearly disturbed. That was the moment I think we all knew we had to get the duck out of there. After we heard whatever it was run off, we all began grabbing our flashlights, Mark grabbed the keys, and we all made a mad dash toward the RV. When we got inside the vehicle, Don immediately locked the door. Mark's attempt at starting the engine was met with a rapid clicking sound. "Duck," Mark said. "What's wrong with the engine?" Jane asked, panicked. "It's old as shit is what's wrong with it," Mark replied frantically. That's when we heard it. Just outside the RV, a near-perfect replica of Mark's voice just outside the RV said, "It's old as shit is what's wrong with it." We froze. Whatever was at our campsite was now outside the RV. And something told me that this time it wasn't going to leave. As we sat there, Terrified of whatever was outside, it began knocking on the door. "Let me in," it said in Jane's voice. A few moments passed. "Let me in," it growled, threateningly. A few moments later it began to bang on the door with such ferocity I was sure it would break off its hinges. Don ran over to the door and leaned against it in a desperate attempt to keep whatever was outside from getting in. Jane began crying while I just stood, petrified. Apparently at some point during this, Mark had started trying to start the engine again, and the RV began hightailing it out of there. We didn't stop until we needed gas. When we got to the gas station, there was some guy filling up his car. He could tell we were distressed and came over to check on us. We explained what happened and where we were. He didn't believe us. That brings me to why I'm writing this. In recent years, I have seen many people online share their experiences of visiting those woods. Some come back and post about how uneventful it was. Most don't. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because I choose to do nothing. I don't expect everyone to believe me. But if just one person is persuaded by my argument and decides not to take the chance, it will all be worth it. Please. If you hear about a creepy forest online, steer clear of it. Something attacked me. I have told 3 people this story. 2 of them were involved that night, and 1 was my therapist. I'm a scientist, and although I'm spiritual and believe in ghosts, I never really believed in demons or things of that nature. I did grow up in a haunted, ghost, house, but since moving out, I have not experienced any paranormal activity, nor have I had any hallucinations. I'm hoping one of you can help me figure out what attacked me. This summer, I wasn't feeling well and was going to go to bed. While I was in my pajamas, I noticed that the local social page had shared about the northern lights being visible. G out. I had been trying to see them all year and kept missing them, so I grabbed a light jacket and headed out. Of note, I had no alcohol or drugs in my system. I drove north and found some fields to stop in, but word had gotten out, and every minute another car was passing, trying to find a dark area to see the lights. After my third spot was wrecked, it takes about 10 minutes for your eyes to adjust, and every headlight started you back at T0. I jumped in my car and drove even farther north. I was on the phone with a buddy of mine, as I am a single female alone at night, and he made me feel safer. I hit the highway, and then I saw it. The empty, abandoned land that was used by the military for some unknown scientific experiments that had just become public. I kid you not, the radiation levels had finally become safe to walk around. I had been there in the daytime and seen some of the old bunkers. Definitely something weird was going on there. But it just so happened to be mostly an open field with no streetlights, making it the perfect spot to see the lights. I turned down the gravel road and drove about a mile in. I even made the comment to my friend that this place was spooky and these weird birds kept flying around. They looked like bats, but when they landed, they didn't stand like bats do. I grew up in the country, so the dark doesn't bother me, and I kept going. I finally reached the middle and pulled over to the side of the road. I could see no one and nothing in the distance. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside. I took a few photos and then waited for my eyes to adjust. After about 10 minutes, right when my night vision was starting to work, the hair on my neck stood up. I knew this feeling, as it usually meant an animal was watching you. Again, I'm a country kid. As I'm on the phone, mid-sentence, I turn to my left, and my entire body freezes. It was like the air was moving, kind of moving shadow, but my mind also just knew it was something that walked on 4 legs, but it stood up. Possibly a dog. But again, it was translucent. I started screaming and ran back to my car. I felt that thing hit my back and bounce off. Like it tried to go through me but couldn't. The second it touched me, it felt like a dementor. But worse if possible. I have never felt such fear and dread. This was worse than death. I do not believe in hell, so for me, death is not frightening. This made me feel like even in death I would never feel happiness again. I jumped in my car and sped down the road, still screaming and praying. I kept screaming for my dad and brother, both dead, and Jesus, I'm not even Christian, to save me. The worst part is, I was driving in the wrong direction. I had to turn around and drive back to get out there. I screamed the entire time for help. At some point, my phone call dropped, and my service, which was fine on the way in, finally came back the second I hit the highway. My friend called back asking me what was wrong, but I was still screaming and crying. I could barely express what I had seen in words. I drove all the way back into town and called a friend who lived nearby. I went to her place and stayed there for a few hours as I calmed down. I didn't know she was a Christian, and I felt fortunate that she believed in her faith. I finally got the courage to go home, and she gave me something for protection. I took a shower to warm up, but my back felt cold, like something had cut a thin line down across my spine. There weren't any marks that I could see, but I had to sit in the shower with my back to the wall because I kept feeling like something was touching me. I lost my voice for 9 days after that and had to lie to my friends and coworkers about the reason why. It's been 6 months, and I haven't had any weird experiences again. Sometimes, though, if something touches my back a certain way, I have a jolt of panic out of nowhere. Other than that, I have had no other issues, but I don't talk about it to anyone because 1. I feel crazy, and 2. I don't want to bring attention to it, as I don't know what I even believe in anymore. I think enough time has passed that I want to know if anyone else has experienced this as well. As a scientist, I know our minds can play tricks on us, and I'm fully able to say maybe the dark tricked my brain, but I can't get over the fear that overcame me after it hit me. I've been scared in the woods at night before. I've camped and been scared something was watching me. This was so much worse. It's like I could feel it in my soul. Please help. I think someone was following me through the woods in Ireland. Back when I was 14 years old, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Maisie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven, I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off, and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker, or jogger passing us by. On one particular evening, I had gone back to these woods with Maisie, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands. As we made our way along the trail, the evening had already started to dim. Wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, I and Maisie stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a good game of hide and seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Maisie wasn't looking, where she would spend the next couple of minutes circling round the hut trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Maisie that day, I'm not sure, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but the way he did so felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I quickly latched my lead back onto Maisie and hurriedly make my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker. I turned again to see if the man was behind me. I could still see him around the curve, only 10 meters away from me now. I did try to tell myself I was just being paranoid, and this man was most likely not following me, but my gut instinct still told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pulled out my phone to call my dad to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I made it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black by now, and there was just one single car in the parking area. But it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him passing by, I try to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park. But he doesn't drive away. He just stays there, sitting inside his car with both the engine and headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here, and yet this very same stranger was. Trying to call and text my dad to say I was waiting for him, I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me, and for those whole 20, or however many more minutes, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing was that my dog Maisie had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Maisie was in general a very nervous dog and basically whined at everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt far longer than 20-odd minutes, the strange man, already with his engine and headlights on, reverses from his parking spot, exits out of the car park and onto the main road, leaving me and Maisie in peace. Although we were now alone, basically stranded outside of a dark forest, I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come and get us, 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you want to know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot he had to pick us up. I don't know if that man really was following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he just sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be the following. 1. My dad can sometimes be a careless douche. And 2. Never hike through the forest alone late in the evening. Unsettling camping experience. Alright, so I've decided to share this story in case anyone has had a similar experience. In the summer of 2023, I was camping with my family in Beaver Creek Campground in Montana for a few nights while visiting Yellowstone. The first night there was the most unsettling experience I have ever had. My mother, stepfather, and his brother had all gone to sleep around midnight, while I stayed up for about an hour by the fire. It was pitch black when I decided to snuff the fire and head to my tent to sleep. I lay in my tent for about 20 minutes. I began to hear sniffing noises immediately outside my tent. Fearing it was a bear, I was frozen. This continued for a while until I heard the familiar breathing and shaking noises of that of a dog. I relaxed, supposing a nearby camper's dog had wandered. I stopped hearing the dog after a while. But then I heard footsteps walking around our campsite and the sound of a large stick being dragged along the ground all around. The possibility of a stranger walking around our campsite in pitch darkness froze me in fear once more. Suddenly, an obvious camera flash had gone off right in front of my tent. I was frozen solid in fear. Later, it felt as though an animal or person had lain down and cradled the corner of my tent. I felt a presence for about 5 minutes. I continued to sense a slight movement in the tent's corners. Still frozen, I prayed for the sensation to stop. But then I was forced to make this person, or whatever, acknowledge my awareness of the situation when I sensed someone else's touch on the zipper of my tent door. I called out loudly, "Who's there?" My stepdad woke up and called out to me, but I was too afraid to open my door. 10 seconds passed when I knew he was out of his tent with his gun. Then I emerged. However, there was nothing there, and after I called out, I didn't hear or sense any movement going away from the campsite. All the while my mom and stepdad had a dog on their tent, which reacted to nothing the whole time. I slept in the car the next 2 nights, and nothing else happened. Anyone have any weird encounters like this in Montana, near Yellowstone, or in general? Thank you for listening to my story. I went camping with my partner at the time in Tijuana a few summers back. I was apprehensive about entering that particular area, as I had heard stories through my whānau about the Urwaras and their history, but my partner assured me he was Tongata Whenua and knew his way around the area well. We found a clearing near a river and slept outside by the fire, which was quite magical. As dawn broke in the morning, I woke up with an unsettling feeling that someone was watching me. I sat up and, through a thin veil of mist across the river, was shocked to see a Maury man standing right there, staring at me. Then I noticed he held a te'a, which he raised and pointed at me. In that moment I had this overwhelming sense that I simply wasn't in the right place and needed to leave. I quickly turned to wake up my partner and tell him someone was across the river watching us. He sat up, and as I turned to point to the man, he had disappeared. The tree line was a good 20 meters away from the river's edge where the man had been standing, so there was simply no way the man could have disappeared within the 2 to 3 seconds I turned my head for. Well and truly spooked, I told my partner I wanted to leave, and that was that, but I do still think about it from time to time as the only near paranormal experience I've ever had. Night in the Appalachians. My girlfriend and her friends invited me to stay at a small Airbnb cabin located in the Appalachian Mountains near Seven Devils. The idea was just to go up there to enjoy some snow tubing and then some light drinking, hot tub, and board games in the cabin afterwards. So the cabin was pretty high up in the mountain, and the drive up to it was kind of scary. Single car length road for the most part, no railings on the side of the road, so if you were on the side of the truck, which we'd rented a Ford WD to make the drive up, thank goodness, it was a sheer drop on that side. Sure, if we drove off the road, we'd likely be stopped by some trees on the way down, but still a bit nerve-wracking. Another thing was some of the trees on the trail had faces on them for decoration. I think they were supposed to look cute, but they just looked kind of unnerving for most of us. I really should have taken pictures, but I was too anxious during the climb. The cabin itself was almost at the top of the mountain and fairly small. The cabin featured a compact living room, a minuscule kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Hot tub on the lower porch because the cabin itself was basically on the second floor, so you had to go up a stairway to get into it. The key to the cabin was in a lockbox, so no special door lock option, just an old-fashioned cabin. We came back after snow tubing and dinner. The others drank enough to get buzzed, whilst I only had a glass of wine since I have a condition that makes it dangerous to get too much alcohol in my system, so relatively sober. We enjoyed the hot tub as planned, witnessed a beautiful shooting star, and then played board games after that until around 1 a.m., and we all went to bed. I woke up a little after 4 a.m. because I was suddenly sweating, and then I felt kind of unsettled. I decided I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I left the bedroom, and nothing seemed amiss, so I used the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, the front door was wide open. Naturally, I felt immediately uneasy. But again, this was a small cabin, so there was nowhere for any intruder to hide. I could easily see the entire interior of the cabin from the tiny hallway. I decided maybe the last person through the door last night after the hot tub didn't fully close the door and lock it appropriately, because there is a sign by the door that says close door firmly, and it was fairly windy outside. I mean, that wind was howling out there. So I go over to the door and close it, making sure that it's firmly enough in the doorway to fully lock it. I even jiggle the handle a few times and try to see if it'll open when locked. It doesn't budge, so I start to head back to the room. Then I hear the door rattle a little bit, and I turn around and stare at it. I watch the lock itself turn, and then the door opens, and it doesn't slam open from the wind. It just slowly swung open. I stayed extremely still because, of course, that was crazy. The door has a huge, clear window on it with no curtains and a big window beside it that also doesn't have curtains, and there was absolutely no one on the other side of it. There's no way someone could have ducked out of view and hurried away from the door after pushing it open either, because they would have had to make a lot of noise hurrying down the steps to get off the walkway. Like I said, it was an old-fashioned door as well with a simple lock and knob, no electronic buttons or anything to unlock or lock by buttons or remotely. After getting the nerve to close the door again and locking it firmly, nothing else happened that night. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was just too scared to do so. The following morning, I told the others about it, and they were pretty spooked too, but otherwise glad we were only staying that one night. Before we packed up the truck to leave, there was this strange knocking noise coming from the surrounding woods. Not like someone knocking on a wall or door. It was a deep, hollow-sounding knock that occurred twice, paused for a while, and then repeated. Perhaps the sound was merely trees knocking together, but given the unsettling events that occurred earlier in the morning, it felt a bit disconcerting. So yeah, I'm from Florida, and though I've experienced other paranormal activity before, that was the most physical thing I've experienced before, and I've definitely heard plenty of stories about odd occurrences in the Appalachians. In a way, I'm glad I experienced something, but I'll never forget the fear I felt. After all, my first thought was that there might be an intruder, and it would have been quite dangerous to be up there so high without anyone else around. If we'd had any reason to run, we could have easily fallen off a cliff or something in the pitch-black darkness outside. Old Man in the Woods. In 2008, I was a student preparing to attend university and needed some extracurricular activities to include in my application. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages following nothing but a map and compass, no GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience, and you camp and overcome hurdles together, etc. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like what I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods and a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s/early 80s, very pale, with liver spots dotting his face and a gray/white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought upon seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes in those weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice, though, that puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him and asking him if he was all right. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk and then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the old man. After maybe a minute he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold onto or anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance it is hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. I and my uncle looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us he needed our help, his friend was in trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that we would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon. That they would have all the tools to help him, etc. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically, he was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets, his skin gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car, all the while my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services explaining to them that there was a possible mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, etc. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. The Woodsman of Dyer, Indiana. The urban legend I have is one I live down the street from. I live down the street from Pheasant Hills Park in Dyer, Indiana, and there's a school that's right next to the woods, which I refuse to go into at night because of what I saw and heard in there. I've walked those woods for years and felt watched, so I started to spread the word. The story that I have heard is that in the early 1900s, before the school and railroad tracks were built, the town was farmland and stuff, so there was a guy who lived in those woods in a cabin. He worked as a lumberjack in town also. Years later, when the tracks were built, they originally ran through the woods right behind his house. One day, as he was chopping down trees, a train approached, unintentionally striking and killing him. Years later, kids claimed they went looking for him because they said that every Halloween night, on the anniversary of the incident, you might find him in the woods. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I have heard. So about 3 years ago I decided to see for myself, and I refused to go in there at night ever again. You'll experience a sense of surveillance, hear unexplained noises, or perceive eerie visuals, akin to the Blair Witch phenomenon. If anyone is interested in testing the legend in modern times, I would like to hear about your personal experiences. But I highly recommend doing what I did to get the best results. Blue campsite ghost. In the late 90s I went to an overnight girls' summer camp for a couple of weeks every year. It's a beautiful chunk of forest in Maine. The layout of this campground features 2 roads that ascend either side of a hill. Along the roads are paths that lead to clusters of cabins, which each house up to 4 girls. Each cabin cluster had a set of 3 porta-potties, since the flush toilets were too far to walk to at night. There is a stone house foundation located next to the cluster of cabins that is farthest into the woods, which will be referred to as DW from now on. I've heard a few spooky stories from DW, but never experienced any specifically there myself. My story comes from my stay in the cluster of cabins adjacent to the furthest one, which I will refer to as BP. BP is in the woods, where the cabins are, and the porta-potties are between the cabins and the road to DW. In fact, the potties are just at the edge of the road that continues to DW. One evening, my group of campers had come home from a bus field trip. It was later than we usually went to bed, and it was very dark. The most important rule at camp is the buddy rule. You never go anywhere without at least one other camper. Counselors were the only ones allowed to travel without buddies. After getting ready for bed, the members of my cabin went together to the porta-potties. We were still energized from the trip and were very giggly. I glanced up to make sure we weren't straying and saw a person on the road walking toward DW, seemingly illuminated by a blue lantern flashlight. From my vantage point, the person was no longer visible once they walked behind the potties. I looked back to my friends and said something like, "We're probably freaking out whoever is on the road if they can hear us." And immediately my friends asked, "What person?" I answered, "There's a counselor going over to DW. They're behind the porta-potties." They didn't see anyone, and as we approached the potties, neither did I. The road was pitch dark in both directions, and so was the surrounding woods. There wasn't even a dark silhouette, like if their lantern had died and they continued walking anyway. There was nowhere they could have gone. They just vanished. I don't remember what the person looked to be wearing. All I remember is the blue light and short, straight, almost shoulder-length light hair. Looking straight ahead as they walked toward DW, and the house foundation. The campground used to be the site of some farmland, probably 100 years ago. I know this because the campground is crisscrossed by low, crumbling stone walls. And the farmhouse foundation in DW. I fell in it once, but that is another silly story. I later learned the legend surrounding the foundation. It was home to a small farming family. Either one child or a boy and girl, depending on who tells the story. One day, when the father was away at the market, the house burned with the other family members inside. He came home far too late. And some say that the skeletons found inside were holding each other, a mother trying to protect her child or children for the last time. My theory is that if I did indeed see a ghost, it may have been the ghost of one of the family members. And an echo-type ghost, repeating actions taken in the past. What did I encounter on the beach? I don't believe in anything paranormal, but I can't think of any rational way to explain what I saw. This happened in mid-November, but I still think about it a lot. I live on the coast of Lake Michigan, where it's common for sea glass to wash up on the beach. It's been a hobby of mine to collect it since I was a little kid, and my mom and I would collect it on the beach near our house. I prefer to go in late fall or early spring when nobody else is there to pick up the good pieces and the wind isn't too cold yet. There's a park near where I live now that is especially good for sea glassing. Tucked in between private properties, the park remains largely undiscovered, and in mid-November, the beach remains completely deserted. There's a paved trail that leads from the parking lot down through the ravine and to the beach house, but on this day I felt like exploring a bit. I walked along the top of the bluff until I found a small, unmarked trail, and I decided to follow that. It led down to the beach, but I couldn't find a good access point that didn't involve climbing, so I kept walking. Eventually it led to a dead end. I turned around to walk back, and as I did, I heard something thump loudly on the ground like it fell out of a tree. Then suddenly I heard the sound of something charging through the brush straight towards me. It sounded large, like a bear, but there aren't any bears in my area. I instinctively made myself look big and shouted "Hey" in a deep voice. Whatever it was stopped about 20 feet away from me. I stood there staring at the spot for about 30 seconds before cautiously continuing back up the trail. I went back to one of the clearings and climbed down onto the beach. The whole time I was walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching me. The beach was empty, though, so I figured I was still just shaken up from whatever happened in the woods. I also kept hearing a second set of footsteps in the gravel behind me matching my pace exactly. But since nobody else was on the beach, I figured it was just an echo. Then I got to the beach house. I had to pee, so I went behind it to see if the bathroom was open. As I turned the corner, I saw something peeking around the far side of the building at me. It had a human-like body, but it was about 7 feet tall and had deer antlers sprouting from its head. Its skin was so pale white that it was translucent. I could see the blue of its blood vessels. It also had no discernible facial features. It had the bone structure of a face, but no eyes or mouth or anything. I immediately started sprinting up the main trail. I'm very out of shape, but I ran the whole way up the bluff. I thought I was going to pass out when I got to my car, but I didn't take a second to catch my breath before driving away. I drove to a nearby restaurant, and while I was there, I texted my friend about it. He told me I was just upset about some other things going on in my life and I was just seeing things. It felt very real to me, but I accepted that. That day, I was experiencing intense emotions, and it's possible that my brain was deceiving me. But months later I still can't get it out of my mind. It felt so real. If it was real, it had to be a cryptid, so I'm making this post now to ask you all what it could be. Rural New York is weird. I live in New York, a little south of Lake Ontario, in the central New York region. There are many port cities around here. Anyways, I'm less than 3 miles from the coast, and the woods and fields here are riddled with events of high strangeness. Disembodied voices coming from the middle of abandoned fields at night during their off-season, no footprints or hunters, this weird masquerade mask white-colored thing that was cupping its face with these long hands and making a mocking crying expression. I got choked up and started crying just writing this, which was right behind the corner of my grandmother's abandoned house. It disappeared when 3 of us went to investigate. No mistaking it for the bush in that corner behind it, which was dark green. Then, on my road, a 10-foot-tall lanky humanoid with a face that none of the people who were with me that saw it want to remember or can even clearly picture. To this day I have a picture of the tree it knocked over when it burst out of the woods and sprinted across the road. It ran into an opposing field in a straight line like a person with its arms chopping up and down and everything, like a pro, and I have never seen or heard anything like it again. The footsteps were so heavy, as was its movement through the foliage, but it was like a person's gait. The only solid detail my brother can remember is the eyes, which he told me were hollow and black even in the darkness, but he says trying to remember anything more makes him cry too. The most I got out of him was that it looked a little like a shrink-wrapped human skull but with patches of mangy-looking hair, including on its face. Definitely not Bigfoot, though. Way too lightly built. I swear I'm telling the truth, and I hope someone else from New York can tell me a little more. If any of these things have names or are known phenomena, I haven't been able to find any related articles or images. It's like it's just in my area or something. It feels wrong outside a lot of nights. I'm not a paranoid guy, really. I'm religious, and my faith is strong. I'm 20 years old, 5 feet 11 inches, and a half, and a lean 163, with a background in striking. By all rights, I should be able to defend myself, but sometimes being outside at night, I get an overwhelming feeling of dread, and occasionally it's accompanied by sounds I can't explain coming from the fields or the woods. I have an extensive amount of knowledge regarding local, and non-local, wildlife. I know what my regular animals sound like at night. I used to take night walks before things started getting weird around the time I was turning 16. Things have 100% changed here, and it feels kind of dangerous. Just know I'm at least 20 miles from any major settlement, and I can literally hear the waves from the lake on windy days! Something I forgot to mention initially. I didn't think it mattered at first, but I have seen multiple large drones in the past observing the fields at night. I was only able to tell because of their lights. I just assumed they were searching for illegal crops, that I'm not sure I can say here, or that they were the landowners doing some pre-season analysis for their hunting. Either explanation I do tend to lean towards more than any other less viable reason. It would be kind of weird to do the latter at night, though. Camping story. Back during the summer of 2011, a few friends and I decided to organize a little camping trip to a forest just a few miles outside our hometown. Delamere Forest, despite being pretty small, presented us with a much-needed opportunity to connect with nature. City living can be good, but it can be stifling, so any chance to get out into the countryside was well received. But as time went by, and the date of the camping trip approached, things began to unravel. Various friends called and texted one by one to let us know they wouldn't be attending, whether due to family illness, lack of cash, or just laziness. Ultimately, only 2 of us decided to attend. So, early on a sunny summer morning, we boarded a train for the journey down to the forest. The weather was perfect, a cloudless sky with a light breeze that made the hike through the woods not nearly as oppressive as we were expecting. It didn't take long for us to find a decent spot in the shade that happened to be right next to a stream we could use for washing and drinking water. The only trouble was the spot was very open, visible to passers-by, and not the least bit subtle. So it's late afternoon, we're tired from our hike, and we decide to build a fire to cook some dinner on. But here's the thing, building a small fire is an essential part of camping, sure, but it attracts people. The smell of burning wood and the cooking food, the smoke, sometimes you might as well be announcing yourself to the whole forest with a megaphone or something. But we know this, so we're not exactly surprised when a group of locals stumbles across our little camp and comes down to say hello. They seem friendly enough at first, and this might sound paranoid, but the whole time I just had this bad feeling about them. It fascinates me how human instinct can pick up things like that, little clues in body language or speech that lead us to believe that someone isn't being entirely genuine. I wasn't sure if it was the way the locals were looking at each other or the strange, probing questions they asked, but I knew they didn't have the best of intentions. When they moved on and were out of earshot, my friend suggested we move the camp. Now he's normally the skittish one who I'm perennially telling to calm down or chill out, but on this occasion, I knew he was right. Maybe we were being a little bit paranoid, but in instances such as that, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So as tired and half drunk as we were, we packed up our stuff, doused the fire, and then started looking for another place to set up camp. Luckily, we found somewhere pretty quick, a heavily wooded hill that basically overlooked our old campsite on one side. Not that we had a direct view of it, but if you walked a minute or so away from camp, we had a pretty good view of the surrounding area. At least, we did during the daytime. As the sun set, we started another fire, cooked ourselves up some ramen noodles in our mess tins, and then proceeded to drink and smoke ourselves stupid. We talked bullshit around the fire until we were too tired and drunk to continue, then retired to our poncho shelters for the night. I'm pretty sure I passed out as soon as I got into my sleeping bag, as I don't remember drifting off or anything. I just know that the next thing I can recall is opening my eyes in pitch darkness to the sound of a distant car revving its engine. At first I was just annoyed to be woken up, the hangover was kicking in hard, and I felt like boiled crap as I tried to fall back asleep. But the distant vehicle kept revving its engine, and as the sound grew louder and louder, I knew it was getting closer. Something told me to go and check it out by the time I started to hear voices. Perhaps it was just a group of kids experimenting with a stolen car, but it's always advisable to be cautious. But when I go to the edge of the hill, I can already see torch beams all over our old campsite. The revving engine was from a vehicle that had been driven all the way down the forest path to our previous camp. Someone was down there, looking for us. I think I acted more out of instinct than anything else, moving as quickly and quietly as I could back to my sleeping friend to wake him. I must have explained what I'd seen like 2 or 3 times. He was just as exhausted and half drunk as I was, but when it sank in, he was up on his feet with me and helping to kick dirt on our dying fire. We then grabbed a pair of binoculars we were carrying with us and then ran back to the edge of the hill to watch the scene below. In utter horror, we could see what was in the men's hands, thanks to the torches they shone on one another. Baseball bats, hammers, and a length of rope were just a few of the things they carried. They spat and cursed, furious that they'd come back too late to catch us and do God knows what. All we had were our Swiss Army knives to defend ourselves with. If the guys down there had decided to actually search the area, they'd have found us pretty easily, and I'm not sure I'd be here typing this today. But to our infinite fortune, they didn't. Maybe they'd been drinking themselves or were just too lazy to actually look for us, but thank God they didn't. With one person keeping watch, the other went back to camp to pack their gear as fast as they could. The guys down below were hanging around our old camp, kicking at the fire we'd so carefully constructed, taking all their spite out on the things we'd left behind. As I've mentioned, they didn't seem keen on actually looking for us, but they didn't seem like they were in a hurry to leave either. This meant we were essentially stuck on this wooded hill, as an escape attempt with our heavy packs meant that, if we were discovered, there would be no outrunning any of them, especially since they had a vehicle. We ended up staying there until morning. Neither of us could get any sleep despite the gang leaving with their vehicle. I remember being terrified they'd return with more people, more torches, and more of a will to find us. But they didn't. They were probably sleeping off their own hangovers by the time we were on the train home. We were due to stay another 2 nights, and I was still annoyed we'd had to call the trip short, but with those scummy local thugs around, we just didn't want to risk it. Be careful when you're traveling around, whether it is internationally or locally, because despite the unfathomable kindness of strangers, some of them aren't so friendly. I was backpacking in the southern winds and hiked into a no-name lake with my dog. I was just fishing and chilling in the afternoon, but that time of year, late spring/early summer, the mosquitoes are ducking biblical up there, and despite wearing a net, the bugs were getting to my pup so bad I could see blood specks from the bites around her eyes, so I decided it would be best for her if we both just chilled in the tent until the sun went down and the bugs went away. Remember, it was still daylight outside. We both crawled into my tent, and within 3 to 4 minutes of lying there in silence, I could hear something walking within 15 yards of my tent. I bushwhacked to this lake. There was no trail or other people nearby. I know that, but I swear I heard heavy bipedal footfalls, and a big branch broke. Usually my dog perks up and barks at deer, but this time she laid her head down and started shaking. She could smell whatever it was better than I could. We waited there in silence for half a minute until whatever it was walked out of earshot. I grabbed my revolver and poked my head out of the tent, then went and walked around the camp, but I didn't see anything. It was very strange, and my dog was scared, thus, so was I. Nothing ever came back that night, but man, that was a strange experience. There is definitely some wild shit in the southern winds. Laughing in the woods. I've been an avid hiker for well over 10 years now and an outdoorsy person for my whole life. Nature has always been a place that made me feel free. My parents always encouraged me to explore and get my hands and feet dirty outside when I was growing up. My brother and I were often referred to as the barefoot kids who walked around our neighborhood and through the surrounding woods. As an adult, I still enjoy the feeling of walking through nature, albeit with shoes now. I've hiked many trails and forests across many different national parks and other public lands, but to me, nothing could beat the forests at my home. I live in a town that borders the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest in North Georgia, a large landscape of forest located on the southern end of the Appalachian Mountains. I grew up with this vast forest as my backyard, and I still have access to it. As such, whenever I'm stressed or just needing some fresh air, I'll either take a short drive to one of the many hiking trails, walk on it for a bit, and then step into the woods and do some off-trail hiking, or simply walk to the edge of my backyard, hop a small fence, and begin exploring the section of the forest that borders my neighborhood. I know people say that's a dumb and unsafe thing to do, and after everything that has happened, I see why now, but at the time it was something I'd done many times before for my whole life. After a particularly long day at work, I decided a little outdoor adventure would do me some good. I changed into some hiking clothes, put some water and granola bars in my backpack, placed my compass around my neck, walked to the edge of my backyard, and hopped the fence. I've read many scary stories about paranormal things happening in the woods. I know all the cliches of the bad vibes, the forest getting quiet, the coppery smells, and the rules if you are in the Appalachians, and to be honest, it was always so dumb to me. I spent my whole life in these woods, and the scariest thing that had happened to me up to this point was having a deer jump out right in front of me because I accidentally walked up on it while it was sleeping. This day was no different. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and I was already feeling better. I wish I had turned back then. I made it about a half mile into the woods and was about to turn back. I was taking a breather and drinking one of my waters by a creek between two small hills when I heard it. Being next to the creek, the noise was difficult to make out, but just over the hill in front of me, I could hear a person talking. "What?" I muttered to myself. I have looked over maps of this area before. There shouldn't be a house or even a hiking trail for another mile. Immediately there were two thoughts. Either this is someone like me who just wants to be alone, or it was someone who was lost. I used some rocks to step over the creek and began moving up the rhododendron-covered hill slowly and quietly. I wanted to hear what the person was saying to know if they needed help. It wasn't long before I had two realizations as I got closer to the crest of the small hill. One, it wasn't a person, it was people, what sounded like a lot of people, and two, they weren't talking, they were laughing. As I inched closer to the top, now squatting low to the ground, the laughs were becoming more and more clear, but somehow that just made it stranger. The laughs sounded normal enough, but they were forced. Everyone in the group laughs when someone tells a joke, and even if you don't understand the joke, you still join in the laughter. It was normal people's laughter, but it sounded breathy and devoid of genuine emotion. No words, no jokes, just constant laughing. I should have turned back. I had no reason to look over that hill. Whatever was going on, it wasn't my business. I should have slunk back down, crossed the creek, and booked it back home, but something was calling me. Something in my head was screaming at me to look over that hill. I wanted to know what they were laughing at. It wanted to see what was so funny. On the other side of the hill were probably 15 to 20 people. They all wore typical hiking attire. Some looked a little dirtier than others, but otherwise they looked fine. They were all laughing, spinning around, patting each other's backs, and moving around in uncoordinated, almost dance-like movements. If you imagine what a weird group acid trip looks like, you probably aren't far off. I remember thinking how funny it looked, and the longer I looked at the people, the funnier it seemed. Looking back, this doesn't make sense. It didn't look funny to me even then. It looked strange and unsettling. Looking at them left a pit in my stomach, but it was like my mind would only let me feel humored by it, like looking at them was some kind of drug. That's when it happened. A single, breathy laugh escaped my mouth. Immediately, unnaturally, the crowd of people stopped laughing and rigidly turned to face me with wide, toothy smiles and emotionless eyes. Some of them twisted so quickly and awkwardly that it was impossible for a human to have done it. Their facial expressions were unsettling. They smiled, but in a way that looked like you would have to really force to keep your lips stretched so wide. Their eyes looked filled with the same lack of emotion that is present in their strained laughs. Immediately the humorous, drugged feeling left me and was replaced by a fear that no person should ever experience. The creek behind me was silent now. It was like my fear had drowned out all noise. Then, they scattered. Some of them sprinted, while others crawled into the dense brush on all fours. The noise was back now. I could hear the birds, the wind, and the creek, but I could hear something else, laughing. I let out a scream and began to run. I sprinted down the hill, jumped clean over the creek, and kept running in the direction I came. The laughing was everywhere. I could hear laughter coming from my right, left, and directly behind me, but when I looked to find the source of the laughter, all I saw were trees and bushes. As I ran by a bush at the top of a hill, I saw an arm shoot out of it with an ear-piercing laugh to follow. I ducked under it, but they grabbed my backpack and pulled it. Maybe I was just off balance, but the thing that grabbed my backpack felt like it had the sturdiness of a tree. My backpack was immediately ripped off me, and I was sent tumbling down the hill. The adrenaline was pumping at this point. Any pain would have to wait. The laughing was getting closer. Once I stopped rolling, I sprung back up and kept running. I kept running for what felt like hours, using the game trails I used to reach that wretched place. Even as the laughing became distant, I kept running. I knew they would catch me if I stopped. I ran until my chest and stomach slammed into the chain-link fence of my backyard. Once inside, I locked every door, closed every blind, and cried on the floor like a child. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't stepped foot in the forest since that day, and I don't plan to do so anytime soon. I always thought the forest was a part of my home. I used to feel at ease in the forest, but now I realize that's no longer the case. All the joy and peace that nature once brought me is now replaced by this sinking feeling of dread every time I imagine being in the woods. The forest isn't my home, it's theirs, whoever they are, and they don't like that I trespassed. I'm writing this now because earlier today I heard a thud on my back door window. When I went to investigate, I found a single granola bar sitting in front of the door. When I stopped and looked at the woods, I heard it. It was faint, but it was there. The sound of breathy laughter coming from deep in the woods. This is something creepy that really happened to me. When I was a kid, my family lived in a neighborhood that backed up to a pretty good-sized wooded area with lots of big green trees and foliage. There were trails that weaved through the area between all the houses and backyards. I used to play a lot back there with the other neighborhood kids, running through the woods, climbing trees, or swinging from vines and branches. My mom had a small group of close friends from high school and college who all had children at about the same time as she did. My friend Jason was one of them. He and I were the same age and got to hang out quite often. We spent a lot of time playing with Legos, trains, action figures, slot cars, Hot Wheels, and other toys, as well as playing outside with tricycles, bicycles, and scooters and running around with our imaginations going wild. We spent a lot of time in the woods behind the house. My family, mom, dad, little sister, and I, moved away from there when I was about 7 years old, but we would still make trips back to visit friends and family, and I would get to see Jason every few years. Sometimes we would drive through the neighborhood to see the old house again. The woods always looked a lot smaller than how I remember seeing them as a kid, but I have very vivid memories of that place. When I was in my early teens, on one of these visits with Jason, when we were alone, our parents and family in another room, he asked, "Do you remember that time when you and I saw a clown in the woods behind your old house?" This question caught me off guard because I had no recollection of this happening. Sounding very confused, I asked, "What? A clown in the woods?" I was puzzled, because if something like this happened to me as a child, I'm sure I would have been traumatized and remembered it forever. He answered, "Yeah. We were running through the woods, just you and me, when we went around a bend in the path and saw a clown standing there, staring at us. We freaked out, turned around, and ran all the way back to your house. I've never been afraid of clowns." Jason is definitely afraid of clowns. I've always wondered why some people are. I know it's not uncommon. Maybe because of movies? Anyway, as I mentioned before, we were kids, and our imaginations would run wild, playing G.I. Joe in the woods, pretending to be Ninja Turtles or other superheroes. I wasn't sure how much of Jason's memory was fabricated or embellished, like maybe something happened that I didn't think was a big deal, but to him it was. I kind of brushed it off, saying I didn't remember anything like that happening, and we continued to hang out until it was time to leave. Every once in a while the memory of him asking this question came back, making me wonder if some part of it were true. A few years later, a little bit further into my teens, we went back again to visit family and friends. I got to see Jason again, and just like before, when we were alone, he asked, "Do you remember that time when we saw a clown in the woods behind your house?" I answered, "Dude, I remember you asking me about that before. I don't remember anything like that happening. Are you sure you're not just making it up, or maybe it's just a dream you had?" He said, "I swear to God it happened. We were running through the woods, just you and me. We came around a bend and saw a clown standing there, staring at us. It freaked us out so badly we froze. I remember looking over at you, and you were looking right back at me, all wide-eyed. We were both so scared that we ran back to your house as fast as we could." I sat there in silence, processing what he said. I don't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but this time I did have a faint recollection of this actually happening. However, in my mind, there's no way it could have been an actual person. I had a vision of one of those inflatable clown punching toys that would pop back up after you punch it over, looking half deflated and sad, hanging from a tree branch. I told Jason that it couldn't have been a real clown and that his mind must be playing tricks. We were just kids, after all. He was adamant that this actually happened and that it was a real clown standing there in the woods staring at us. Eventually we moved on to another subject and didn't talk about it again. Many years later, in my mid-20s, my family made another trip back there. Even as an adult, Jason brought it up again. The conversation this time was much shorter. I recall saying something like, "That is so weird. I can't remember anything like that ever happening, but now that you've brought it up, every time I visit, it's almost like it could have been real." This stuck with me from then on. Now, here I am at 40 years old. Every once in a while I think about Jason and the clown in the woods. I'm not sure if my brain is manifesting memories, and I have no way of knowing if any part of his recollection is true, but there is definitely a faint memory in my mind that I can't deny. Even though we are still connected via our parents, I haven't asked him about it since. I wonder if he would remember. Does anyone else have similar happenings, where you may not remember an experience but have been told about it so many times that it comes to life in your mind? When I was young, around 16, early 2000s, I lived in Wazeeka, Wisconsin. And one night I and a friend were sitting on the sidewalk on the outskirts of town. Across from us was nothing but some swampy area, a river, and then endless forests, hills, and caves. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, we heard what sounded like a person yelling help off in the distance out by the river. My friend speculated that someone might have become stuck on the river, overturned their canoe, or experienced some other incident. So we actually called the police, who took a good 45 minutes to get there, and they came and walked out there for a minute with flashlights but didn't see anything and left. So the next night, we decided to sit out there again to see if it would happen. It was incredibly foggy that night too, you could only see a few feet in front of you. And around the same time, in the middle of the night again, we heard it. Except this time it sounded like a scream off in the distance. And as we sat there, it kept getting closer and closer until it finally sounded like it was right across the street from us. At that point, we both got up and started booking it back at my place in town. And whatever this was chased us. We had to pass several abandoned buildings on our way back into town. We could hear them screaming and keeping up with us. Its screams would get muffled by the buildings. We made it back to my place, told my mom about it in the morning, and my mom jokingly mentioned the Irish Banshee and how it screams to forewarn people of a death. I shrugged it off, but about 6 months later my friend's brother crashed his car into a telephone pole right across from where we had been sitting. And then he left the scene of the accident and went to his dad's house and shot himself. It was ruled as suicide, but nobody could understand why he did it. So I thought that was an incredibly eerie coincidence. Yes, some animals in Wye are known to scream, like foxes, cougars, rabbits, etc., but I listened to soundboards back then of all the wildlife in southwestern Wye, and nothing matched what we heard. The scream was way too shrill and long-lasting. Very loud. Imagine a person screaming "ah" with all their might and being. Therefore, the source of the sound must have had large lungs to produce such a noise. It was loud enough that it even reverberated. Most animal screams are very short, soft bursts of shrieks rather than actual screams. And that's not the only weird-ass experience I had living in that part of Wye. Had several other experiences with other people there as well, including living in a haunted house in Steuben, Wisconsin, and hearing weird shit in the woods at a trailer party up on a hill. It was so creepy that everyone at this party literally ran down this hill in the darkness to get to their cars and get the duck out of there. Therefore, I believe there is more to the rural areas and towns of Wisconsin than what initially appears. I was hiking with a friend at Volcano's National Park around 2 a.m. to take pictures of the lava. We had to walk along this long-since abandoned road in a place called Desolation Wilderness for a few miles to get to the overlook of the caldera with the bubbling lava lake in it. Not only is the volcano itself associated with the deepest spiritual native lore, but I've been told by someone who works for the parks that they are always finding people's remains, and they don't even report half of it. So anyways, we take some pictures, and each frame I'm getting a lot of noise in my frame despite my ISO being 200, camera talk for little to no grain in my image. There are these colored points of light, or orbs, in different places in every shot. By the dozens, if not more. I thought that was weird, what is producing these random artifacts on my image? But I get some cool shots, and we start walking back. Now it's well after 3 a.m., and nobody else is around at this point. This is where it gets weird. Shortly after, we see a light up ahead of us on the trail that looked as if it were a hiker shining their flashlight as they were heading towards us, sort of just bobbing along. We thought nothing of it, as we were just expecting to come across a hiker heading the opposite way. We keep going for a bit and never come across anybody, which we thought was super odd. It's so quiet out there you could hear a pin drop, and basically there was only this road you could take with dense brush on either side, and it was basically super dangerous to go even a few steps off the road in any direction. We walk further along, and we see another light shine. This time it looks like it is shining onto a person, and we can now for sure make out the perfect black silhouette of a man walking in our direction just a little ahead of us near a bend in the road, maybe 40 yards ahead. Suddenly again the light vanished. This time for sure I thought we would come across somebody. As we keep walking, we get to the point in the road where we just seconds earlier saw the black shadow, and there is nobody there. The only sense my brain could make of it was someone jumped off the trail and into the bushes, but it was complete silence, no sounds of twigs snapping or rustling, and it was so quiet out there you could hear a pin drop. The hair is standing up on the backs of our necks, and we keep going and finally get back to our car, and it's the only one there. Once we had passed that spot, it felt as though someone was behind us from then on, and I just kept compulsively checking over my shoulder. We never came across anyone but had the distinct feeling someone else was there with us all the way from when we first saw the light until we reached the parking lot. I later saw on the news a lone hiker about a week earlier had fallen off a ledge into the caldera to his death almost exactly where we saw the mysterious shadow figure at 3 a.m. Strange whistles on Peabody Creek Trail. Hello, this is about something I heard on the Peabody Creek Trail while hiking it, and I figured this good community would enjoy it. I live in a relatively small city, around 20,000, called Port Angeles, and we have the Olympic National Park basically in our backyard. Anyhow, right near the visitor center for the park, there is a half-mile trail that loops back around to the visitor center. And about halfway down the loop, there is a trail called Peabody Creek Trail. It's about 2.5 miles long, 2.7 miles to be exact. Now I'll admit I'm not the most outdoorsy type, quite the opposite. I'm the typical teen that stays inside all day gaming rather than hiking or camping or anything of that sort. But on the last day of school before graduation, one of my teachers gave my friends a list of hikes to do in the area. They invited me to go on one a week or two ago, but I declined because there is no way I'm lugging my fat ass 8 miles up and down a mountainside. So I decided to pregame the hikes, or actually go outside and hike some of the less intense trails near the area. Anyways, after canceling the hike, I loaded up my bag with stuff, mostly water, so I could get adjusted to carrying a heavyish bag up trails. I had a little over a gallon of water split into 5 bottles, some jerky, dried fruits, and a couple of granola bars. I went initially intending to just walk the half-mile loop, but on the way to the visitor center I saw something on the side of the road that, looking back, was for sure a warning I should have followed. I live within walking distance, so I just walked to add some more steps in. On the side of the road was a dead cat. It had clearly been there a few days, maybe a week. Instead of taking that sign, I instead kept walking down the road. After maybe 15 to 20 minutes of walking, I started the half-mile loop, which was uneventful, albeit quite nice. Once I made it to the trailhead for Peabody Creek Trail, I said something along the lines of "Duck it, why not?" And I started up the trail. I should preface that I got to Peabody Creek Trail at about 6:30 p.m. so the sun was about to start setting, and I didn't bring a flashlight in case it got dark, because I'm just that smart, I guess. Now Peabody Creek Trail is a lot rougher than the half-mile loop, at least for my fat ass. Peabody Creek Trail has a lot of up and down hills and stairs. There are a lot of steep stairs too. While walking down the trail, I got the shit scared out of me by some other people walking the trail, which was made much better the second I recognized one of them. It was a staff member from my high school and presumably his wife and dog. We chatted for a minute about nothing in particular, as you do when you only kind of know someone, and I let them pass me. After they passed me, I kept walking and noticed the bridge was totally out. It was a log with boards attached to the top, which crossed from the right side of Peabody Creek, the body of water, to the left side. The bridge had been snapped in half at the middle, across, not lengthwise, and had fallen into the creek, and so to keep going up the trail, you'd have to climb down one almost sheer face, only about 7 to 10 feet down, but still, and cross the thankfully shallow creek. At that spot it was about 6 inches deep at the deepest, and then climb up the other bank that was about 10 to 12 feet up. I should have taken the bridge being out in such an unnatural way as another sign to leave, but I didn't, and I went down one bank and up the other and went about 20 feet further up the trail when I heard a whistle. The trail in front of where I was looking curves left around a massive hill, and then it keeps going forward again. The whistle I heard was slightly left of me, maybe 100 feet up the trail. It was 2 short notes, one lower, one higher. It was a man's voice, so I figured that it was probably the guy that passed me earlier whistling for his dog. Then I heard the whistle again, except it was slightly closer and coming from directly in front of me. It was the same exact 2 notes with no differences, none at all. Normally when you whistle or do anything with your voice, really, there are minor fluctuations you can hear, small differences each time. There were none. It was like someone had recorded the first whistle and played it back. Then I heard it again, the same whistle, only closer and about 45 degrees to my right. Right then I was hit with that overwhelming feeling of dread that you shouldn't be somewhere. And then I heard the exact same damn whistle again on my direct right. All of the whistles happened in a span of about 15 to 20 seconds and spanned a distance of at least 500 feet, impossibly fast for a person, especially because the last 3 whistles were for sure from off trail. As soon as I heard the 4th whistle, I did a 180 and started making my way back out, down the bank and back up the next, and once I thought I would be out of earshot, I booked it all the way back down the Peabody Creek Trail and out to the visitor's center. Now, I'm not necessarily a paranormal skeptic or a believer. I'm not one to jump to paranormal explanations immediately. I much prefer a mundane explanation, but I can't wrap my head around it. The whistle sounded like a human male whistling, but no one can run that fast without making noise either. There were no brush sounds at all in between whistles. Maybe someone set up some system to play back the whistle and had them planted around, but that doesn't explain the bridge. If anyone has any ideas, I'd much appreciate it because I'm stumped. My friends and I've discovered something disturbing in the woods. Please forgive me, as it has been almost 10 years since this event took place, so I am a little fuzzy on a few of the details, but I will tell it to the best of my ability. It was mid-March, my friends and I were in our early 20s, and we were really into backpacking, hiking, camping, etc. Living in the Pacific Northwest, we were definitely in the right area to satiate our cravings for the outdoors. We wanted to go on a weekend camping trip, so earlier in the week we went out scouting for an area to camp. After we drove a ways out of town, we found a rural road that looked really promising. A few miles down the road, we came to an intersection. We could continue straight, where the paved road turned to gravel, turn left to be near a creek about 20 feet from the road, or turn right to what looked like a little used, mostly grass-covered road. We decided to turn right and see what that area held. The grassy road followed a gentle left curve for about 100 yards, then opened up to a small roundabout with a flat campground-looking area to the right of it. The site looked well used, but the road and flat area had a lot of untouched grass, so we thought no one had been there in a while. We liked the spot, but it was too close to the road, so we got out to look around. Shortly into our inspection, we found a trail that went deeper into the woods. We hiked up it for a quarter mile or so and really liked the way it looked. It was rural enough that we could really feel like we were in the outdoors, and there was no pesky cell reception to distract us from Mother Nature. After deciding the area would be our spot for the upcoming weekend, we packed up and headed home. Once we got back to cell service, one of us used maps to make sure our prospective campsite wasn't on anyone's property. To our relief, we were in the clear for several miles around the area. We decided that since we were all able to get Friday off work, we would pack up Thursday after getting home and head out that night so as to squeeze the most out of our trip. Fast forward to Thursday night. All of our gear is packed, and we have all the food, water, and illicit substances we could need for 3 days of unwinding in the woods. As we pulled up the familiar grassy road and got around the bend, we saw the reflection of our headlights glaring back at us from the darkness like the eyes of a large demon, angry we intruded on its slumber. It was the tail lights of a parked car. Our hearts collectively drop as we slow to a stop and decide what to do. We can hear a dog barking and see a tent set up near the car, so we decide to turn tail and head home in defeat. After regrouping at home, we decide that if we try again the following night, it will be enough time that hopefully whoever was there will have packed up and left. Fast forward to Friday night. We pull up, and the car is still there, along with the tent and the barking dog. Big letdown for sure, but after a brief talk amongst ourselves, we decide to risk it and stay. We park on the roundabout, about 50 feet from the car and tent, and hike up the trail to avoid the other campers. We get out, and the dog's barking reaches a feral crescendo. Since it hasn't attacked us yet, we assume it's leashed. We quickly put on our packs and hike up the trail in the dark with our flashlights on. It's a creepy walk, especially since everyone is practically holding our breaths in fear of someone coming out to yell at us for trespassing or ruining their night or something, but nothing happens. Once we find a suitable location and establish our camp, we immediately start celebrating. We joke about what the campers we passed must be doing and try to scare each other with half-baked theories about what they might do to get back at us for interrupting their peaceful night. We had no idea that our trip would leave a lasting impact on our memories. Eventually we all fall asleep, and the next day rolls around. We spent that Saturday hiking further up the trail and exploring. Nothing major happens, and we end the night much in the same way we did the previous one. Sunday is when the story takes a turn. Everyone is tired, hungover, and pretty much ready to go back to civilization, so we start hiking back to the car. When we get there, we all notice a complete shift in the atmosphere. I can only describe the scene as eerie. It felt like all the life had been sucked out of the wilderness. For the first time since arriving, the woods were completely silent. The car was still there, and so was the tent, but we don't hear the dog barking anymore. It's daylight now, and we can see more of the encampment. It was unusual, to say the least. The car was elevated on small ramps typically used for vehicle maintenance. The tent was opened, and there was a plastic fold-up picnic table set up next to the car with all kinds of things on it. The contents of the car included motor oil, transmission fluid, automotive tools, an open gallon of milk, paper plates, and various food items. It looked like someone was working on their car in the middle of the woods and stopped to prepare a meal, only to seemingly vanish into thin air. Curiosity overtook better judgment, and we decided to have a look around. Walking cautiously through the campsite, we looked for any clues about why the person, or people, could have left in such a hurry. My mind immediately went to the missing 411 cases. One of my friends pointed out that the windows of the vehicle were heavily fogged up, so we tried our best to peer inside. The windows were also pretty heavily tinted, so looking through them proved difficult, but the fog hadn't quite reached the edges of the glass. This made it possible to just barely see the silhouette of a large dog in the back seat. It sat there upright and panting hard but not moving or making any other noise. My heart sank. It was Sunday morning, and for all I knew, that dog had been trapped in this car since Thursday night when we first arrived. I assumed that was why it wasn't barking anymore, as it probably didn't even have the energy to do so and was likely badly dehydrated. We debated what to do and decided trying to break a window or open a door to let the dog out was a bad idea, since it could be violent or hurt itself on the broken glass. Despite the lack of cell reception, we reluctantly concluded that the best course of action would be to drive back to town and promptly contact animal control once we had service. We left the area, and I called animal control, doing my best to explain the situation to the representative who answered. He told me he would head out to the area in a few hours and update me on how it went. I thanked him, and that was the end of the call. I waited around for hours to hear back from the person, and I started getting restless. Worried for the well-being of the dog, I ended up calling him back when it reached around 7 p.m. He said he tried to follow my instructions, but to my dismay, he mistakenly continued straight down the gravel road for several miles rather than turning right onto the grassy road. He had actually just gotten back to cell phone service when I called. He told me he would head back out there the next day and try again, as it was getting late and he had other calls he had to get to. I was distraught. I started debating heading out there myself to let the dog out of the vehicle, but ultimately decided it would be best to let the professionals handle it. I had no idea how good that decision was at the time. The next day, I heard nothing back from the animal control guy, despite several calls from me. By about 7 p.m. I was really frustrated and desperately hoping for the best but ultimately fearing the worst. That's when one of my friends, who'd been silently browsing her phone for a while, suddenly gasped. When we asked what was wrong, she started reading aloud from her phone. It was a news story from a city about 4 hours away from ours. To this day, I have no idea how or why they were able to report on this news so quickly. The story roughly went as follows. On Redacted Road, the same one we went down to camp, in the town of Redacted, animal control was called about a dog trapped in a vehicle for several days. When they arrived on the scene, they tried the door of the vehicle, which was locked. The animal control employee called the local deputies, and a state patrol officer who was in the area showed up to assist. Upon shining his flashlight through the tinted window of the vehicle, the state patrol officer was able to identify the body of a woman in the back seat, accompanied by the dog in question. When the local deputies arrived, they were able to open the vehicle and help animal control capture the dog, a pit bull, who was very aggressive upon the door being opened. The woman passed away. Cause of death is at this time unknown. We sat in silence for approximately 10 seconds, and then a private number appeared on my phone. I answered, and a female voice said, "Hello, this is Detective Redacted. Is this Mr. Redacted?" To which I answered by saying, "Yes, may I ask what this is about?" Or something along those lines. She asked if I was the person who called in the dog trapped in the car, and I told her that I was. She asked me to explain to her what happened, and I told her everything from the Thursday night we went out there up until our present phone call, minus the bit about us just having read the news story. Something in my gut told me it would be better not to mention what we had just learned. She seemed surprised and said, "Oh, that's it?" I responded by saying, "Yes, that's it." And as an afterthought, I asked how the dog was doing. She said it was alive and in the hands of animal control. I then asked if she needed anything else from me, and she said no, but that I would hear from her if anything else came up. The call ended, and we all started talking at once, asking each other if anyone had touched the vehicle or anything at the campsite. To our relief, it appeared none of us had. We couldn't help but imagine what would have happened had we broken a window to rescue that poor dog, though. The next day I called the animal control guy and reintroduced myself and apologized for his experience after explaining that we saw a news story about what he had found. I asked him what would become of the dog, and he told me it was going to the Humane Society and that they were going to try to rehabilitate it. Apparently, it had been trapped in the vehicle so long that it started eating the person who was in there with it. I asked if I could come visit the dog, and he said that right now the dog was technically evidence related to the case and that I couldn't see it, but he would let me know if anything changed. After a few weeks of waiting and wondering, I called the Humane Society to ask about the dog and was told they regrettably had to put it down. I guess there was just no coming back from what that poor thing went through. I didn't get or ask for any more details. Eventually we got word about the coroner's report. The woman was a transient mother who had an ex-husband and a 9-year-old son. She died from a drug overdose. Time of death was recorded to have happened at approximately midnight of the very same Thursday that we first went to the campsite and saw her car. After all this time, I searched that old news story about what had happened just to refresh my memory on the details. What I discovered was truly unexpected. According to several other news stories that came up in my search results, stretching back to at least as early as 16 years before our event took place and up until the current year of 2025, there have been a surprising number of mysterious deaths that occurred on that specific road we found. We haven't been back to that neck of the woods since, and probably never will. Camping in the Orbs, North Carolina. Spooky. So, my boyfriend and I were bored and decided to go camping. We looked around and found that the Orbs would be a wonderful place to go. We both were nervous about paranormal stuff, as we live in NC and are quite familiar with what goes down in the Appalachians. The Orbs aren't a part of them, so we thought it was fine. We camped, and the first night was normal, just super cold, and we were having a hard time keeping the fire up. It got so cold that we decided at 5 a.m. to drive back to our home until it got warmer. The next night was pretty much the same thing, except my boyfriend heard some whistling, but we just chalked it up to our neighbor campers doing it. It still made us a bit on edge, but we both tried to not think about it so we wouldn't freak out. The last night, we caught some crawfish and cooked up a little seafood boil on the fire. Everything was going good. The neighbor campers leave. While the crawfish was boiling, it started to rain. We were sad because we recalled the weather calling for clear skies that night. Well, it was clear skies. We looked up and saw a vast sky of stars. Not a single cloud in sight. I was confused and thought maybe it was a small cloud, but then I looked at the satellite radar and saw no cloud cover at all nor precipitation for over 300 miles away. We both try to ignore it and start putting food on our plates. Then, the rain stops and everything gets super quiet. We both have the hair on the back of our necks stand up and get a super weird gut feeling. Again, we tried to ignore it, but in the distance we heard a distinct whistle once more. With the neighbors gone, we went to the car with a pot of seafood boil and booked it out of there. On the way out, there are several occupied campsites, but not a single fire. It was 9:30 at night. We passed a few houses and a ranger station, all of which had no lights on. We still had a horrible feeling. As soon as we hit the edge of the forest, we finally see another car and some homes with lights on. It was like we drove through a dead zone. We have never been so happy to see people, ha! And we will never go there again at night. The next day, we returned to pack everything up, only to discover that the car required 3 cranks to start. Bye, worries. I live in the Pacific Northwest, deep in the woods of Washington state. While I lived at my parents' house, they had 2 horses, one of which would always get out during the spring. When this happened, his brother would stay in the pen and have a God Almighty fit. The night this happened was late spring and around 1 or 2 at night. The brother was having his normal fit, so I got up, threw on some pants, and grabbed my shotgun. In the woods at night, it is essential to be armed because there are cougars and coyotes that can cause trouble. I had a flashlight I could clip on my front so it was hands-free and worked as a small floodlight. There are paths behind the house that are old logging trails, and we had a direct connection straight out back, and the horse was almost always found just off the path. When I got out and onto the path, it split into an upper path and a lower path, and for some reason the lower path terrified me that night. I took the upper path and hiked close to half a mile with no sign of the horse or anything that night. You will often see deer bedded down, raccoons, or hear things moving in the brush, but that night I didn't see or hear anything. It was dead silent. I made it back to the entrance and started looking down the lower path. I was still terrified, but I pulled the shotgun off my back and slowly made my way down it. Only about 20 yards down it, I heard a sound to my left. It was 3 clear, distinct knocks. It didn't sound like knocking on a tree but like a fist on a thick wooden door. I froze and aimed at where I heard the sound and strained my eyes and ears. After a few heartbeats, I heard the sound again, but this time it was coming from behind me to my right. I still remember my blood running cold and my gun swinging from the first spot to the second spot. I slowly walked backwards, still trying to aim at both spots but never seeing or hearing anything move in the thick brush. When I had walked most of the way back towards the entrance, I finally turned and ran home. About 2 hours later, my dad came home, and together we went back out to find the horse. The horse was waiting at the gate for us to let him back in. I refused to go into the woods after dark, armed or not. Camping nightmare. The last year of my sister Jennifer's summer before college, we went camping up at Gilbert's Creek, located in the Uinta Mountains. It was the year 2003, and we packed our tent, sleeping bags, and all the essential camping gear. We were driving her old 1989 Toyota Tacoma, good old Yoshi, since the road we would take to get there was an old ATV trail. The Toyota was so small it barely fit between the trees on either side of the road. The trail to the camping spot was a good 7 miles from the main dirt road up in the Uinta Mountains. We loved discovering secluded camping spots where no one else could camp nearby, and we successfully found one. We found the perfect place to set camp right next to the river. A large tree had fallen across the river, allowing us to cross it and hike around on the other side to explore more areas. We brought our little chihuahua, Maina, along with us. She hated people. She was terrified of anyone who came to our home. She barked at all of our friends and family members who came to visit. She was annoying. We were so excited to go camping, but we had no idea the danger we were putting ourselves in. The first night, we stayed up and told each other stories and joked around by a fire we had going, and Jennifer started telling me a story her friend told her about how he had seen Sasquatch. As he was camping with a friend, they both set up a tent where the top came off so you could see the stars. They fell asleep and awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of branches breaking. They both looked at each other and stayed very quiet as they listened to something approaching the tent. Their hearts were pounding as a massive creature approached the tent, towering over it. They saw this huge black figure start to bend down and make direct eye contact with them. As they closed their eyes in sheer terror, it slowly stood straight up and slowly walked away back into the forest. So after her friend's story, I and my sister put out the fire and went to the tent. We lay down and opened the sides of the tent so we could see outside. There was netting on each side of the tent once unzipping the plastic layer. After hearing that story, I didn't want to chance not being able to see something if we too heard something in the middle of the night. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, something was slowly waking me from sleep. Way off in the distance I could hear something. I woke right up and looked directly at Jenny. She was already awake, looking straight up, listening intently to the sound. It was drums. We were hearing drums. Like the kind you hear before a large battle is about to take place. We both listened intently until it finally faded away and then silenced. I looked at her and said, "What the hell was that?" She said, "Supposedly this used to be an old Indian battleground. Maybe we just heard the drums they used to play before they all were massacred." "Jenny, you brought us to camp in an old Indian battle/burial ground," I said. I was scared to death. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. We woke up the next morning and started to make breakfast. It was so serene listening to the sound of the river right next to us, and we heated up eggs and chicken. I was slicing up some fresh tomatoes and started sipping my coffee. We used to drink Nescafe and hot chocolate since we were not allowed to have coffee at home. We would disguise it as hot chocolate. Ina and I were anticipating a human breakfast when an elderly man, dressed in camo, emerged from the woods and positioned himself between my sister's chairs. He had a long gray beard and shaggy hair underneath a camo baseball cap. He had no facial expression whatsoever and piercing gray eyes. At first glance, I was thinking, why in the heck is this old dude, mid-40s? That's old to teenagers decked out in camo in the middle of summer. And then I noticed on his belt was a massive machete buckled in on the side. Jenny was startled and said, "Oh. Good morning," and smiled a beautiful, dashing grin at him. He was dead silent and just kept walking. Not a word. No expression. Nothing. He just kept walking. He appeared as if he had never laid eyes on us. The weirdest part about the whole thing was Ina didn't bark once. I thought for sure she would have been freaking out screaming. But not even a yip. We slowly watched him until he disappeared from view in the trees. That was so weird. I said to my sister, "I know. He didn't even say anything when we talked to him. He walked right in between us and said nothing," Jenny said. "And where did he come from? We haven't heard a single four-wheeler or ATV since we have been here. We are back here, more than 7 miles." She added. This was one of the weirdest encounters either one of us had ever had. We started joking about the incident after we brought up how Ina didn't bark, so it meant the old man, mid-40s, had to have been a ghost. It was the only logical theory, really. We got breakfast cleared away and decided to go for an adventure to see more of the area. We walked carefully across the log that had fallen by the river and went exploring. Everything was green and lush, and all of the wildflowers were in bloom. We were pretty careless about where we were walking since we knew all we had to do was walk back towards the sound of the rushing river to find our way back towards camp. We hiked for a ways. Ina was not the best at keeping up. She cried and whimpered, tagging along behind us. She got pretty far back and just started crying like she couldn't see us, so Jenny started calling for her. She finally caught sight of us and started running at us like she had been lost in the forest for days. She ran fast like a little rabbit. She leapt high into the air, and all of a sudden she was gone. She fell right into a hole. It was a little squirrel hole, and she was screaming. We went and grabbed her out of the hole, and she was fine. The poor little thing was just terrified of being outdoors. She was not happy about it at all. She was definitely not cut out for it. It also was not a highlight of our hiking excursion having a straggler along, so we decided to go back to camp and let her rest. By the time we got back to camp, it was a little past 1 o'clock. So we started to reheat what was left over from breakfast and just have that for lunch. I and Jenny talked and gabbed and talked, and just took in the scenery around us. I noticed movement on a mountainside and peered closely, hoping to see a deer or an elk sneaking through the tree line. As I kept my gaze, however, I noticed that it was blending. It was blending in well, and then it dawned on me what I was seeing. It was that guy again. He was walking very slowly through the tree line about 20 feet out from our camp along a mountainside, staying in line with the tree cover. I turned to Jenny and said in a loud whisper, "Jenny. That guy is up there walking around." Jenny squinted and peered, then her eyes went wide. "Oh my heck," she said. "What is he doing?" I whispered. "Well," Jenny started, "maybe he works for the Forest Service or something, and he is making trails out here. Or," I contributed my thoughts, "perhaps he was lost, hungry, and came to our camp looking for food, but we returned before he could make himself a sandwich." Ha 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 ha. We both started giggling and kept on gabbing and talking and gabbing like the silly, dumb teenagers we were. We stayed by the campfire for pretty much the remainder of the day, and when evening hit, Jenny wanted to go exploring again. I told her that Ina was just going to cry and whine the whole time and that it would be just like before. She agreed, and we decided to put her in the truck. So we put her in the truck and started walking to the old stump lying across the river. Ina started screaming and crying with her head barely high enough that we could see it through the driver's side window. "We can't leave her in there," Jenny said and walked back to let her out. Ina had peed all over the driver's side seat. "Oh my gosh. Ina!" Jenny yelled. I started busting up laughing as she got a towel and wiped up as much pee as she could off the seat with a disgusted look on her face. Priceless. Once she finished, I said, "Okay, let's go." "Wait!" yelled Jenny. "What?" I said. "What are we going to do with Ina, Jesse?" I thought about it. "Just put her in the tent." "What?" Jenny cried, "Are you crazy? She just peed all over the truck. She will pee all over our sleeping bags if I put her in there." I started laughing again. "Well, then just leave her by camp." I said she won't try and cross the stump, she is too much of a pansy. So we left my Ina by the camping chairs and told her to stay. We were halfway across the stump when I heard Jenny scream, "My Ina!" Here comes my Ina scurrying across the stump, walk, 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 plop. My Ina jumps straight into the river. My Yana. Jenny is frantic. I was the first one on the stump, so I immediately ran the rest of the way across and started running along the riverbank to catch up to her floating down the river. I finally caught up to her and jumped in and grabbed my sister's little drenched rat. She was shaking and shivering as I got her back to camp, and I handed her to Jenny to wrap in a towel. It wasn't the same towel used to wipe up the seat. I was soaked from head to toe and went straight to the tent to put dry clothes on. The water was extremely cold. I could hear Jenny talking to my Ina, trying to calm her down and cuddling her, I'm sure. I started getting dry clothes on. The tent's plastic siding was still down, and I peered out across the river, and there in some willow bushes was the old man staring with his piercing eyes directly towards the tent. My heart started pounding. I scrambled to get completely dressed and peered out just enough to glance again, and I couldn't see him anymore. What the literal EFF? I was scared. I felt dread and fear like I have never before. I kept searching the area where the willow bushes were, and nothing. Gone. I had no idea where he went. I hurried out of the tent and tried to calmly sit by my sister while scanning the entire area. As I scanned, I slowly told Jenny, "So when I was just changing." I stopped for a moment, still searching for him. "Yeah?" Jenny said. "Jenny," I whispered, "when I was just changing in the tent." I looked over across the river, and I noticed that old man sitting in some bushes looking over to the tent. I hurried and got completely dressed, and when I looked back, he wasn't there anymore. I was still searching everywhere, scared to my core. Jenny's eyes went wide in total terror. "We have to leave right now." Jenny immediately jumped up and started heading for the truck. She put my Ina inside and went straight for the tent. I slammed the camping chairs shut and threw them in the back of the truck along with the cooler, then headed over to help Jenny. She literally took the sticks apart that held the tent together, and it collapsed with all of our clothes and pillows and sleeping bags inside of it still. We were still searching all around our camp. The tent was so heavy, we literally dragged it to the side of the truck and used all of our strength to slide it up into the bed. We have never packed up camp so quickly in our lives. We both hopped in and locked the doors, still searching, thinking at any second the man would come running out with his machete in his hand. Jenny drove briskly out of the area we were staying in. She finally broke the silence. "You know that if you didn't see him across the river, we still would have been there right now. And we would have fallen asleep tonight, and we would have been killed. He would have come into our camp and slaughtered us." She was right. She was absolutely correct. Whoever that man was, he was watching us the entire day and was waiting for it to get dark. There is no mistaking your instincts. When your instincts begin to warn you that death is imminent, you must heed their warning. You listen to it. My heart still beats fast at the memory of looking across the river at the old man's piercing eyes. Someone's in the woods. This is a story that was only recently unlocked in my memory within the last week or so. I think I forced myself to forget it because it was so damn creepy. Flash back to around 2010. I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it was a lovely summer evening in the Midwest. My buddy, who I'll call Chase for this story, invited me and 2 of my other friends in the neighborhood over for a sleepover. Like I said, we were at an age where close adult supervision was starting to slip, and Chase's house was a great spot for unsupervised shenanigans. Chase was adopted by a relatively older couple. I remember his parents being in their late 50s, while most of the rest of ours were in their late 30s/early 40s. His father was paralyzed from the legs down while serving in the Gulf War and required caretakers, and his mom was some kind of business executive who wasn't in town too much. In addition to this, Chase's only sibling was much older and had already moved out for college by this time. So, whenever we were hanging out there were almost never any eyes on us. We never did anything bad, but typical stupid stuff you'd imagine kids at the time would do: shooting airsoft guns, putting all kinds of crazy seasonings in instant ramen, staying up late playing M-rated games that none of us had yet, that kind of stuff. Chase's house was also by far the biggest house in the neighborhood, sitting on top of a hill with a gate, a big long driveway, and a huge yard that surrounded the perimeter of the house that backed into a wooded area, which eventually led into a state forest. This one particular night, Chase has the idea that we should set up a tent in the woods and camp out for the night. While I don't think any of us were jumping out of our skin to do this, we all complied on the condition that we stayed at the edge of the woods so we could use the bathroom and get snacks easily from the house. We set the tent up, laid out our sleeping bags, grabbed as much junk food as physically possible, and hung out in it for the night. We goof around for a few hours even after the sun sets until the sugar high dies off and the unhealthy food settles in. We, one by one, start to fall asleep. I was usually the first one to crash at sleepovers, and tonight was no different. However, this sleep was not for long. I get woken up by someone shaking me out of the pitch black. As my eyes adjust, the concerned face of my friend comes into focus. Before I can chew him out for waking me up, he whispers, "Do you hear that?" I sat up carefully until I heard the noise he was talking about, noticing another one of my friends was awake too. It was a whistle. Somebody out in the woods was whistling. Each whistle was drawn out and breathy, followed by another equally drawn out note. Even writing about this now still gives me goosebumps. From the sounds of it, it wasn't that close but not that far either. I'm sure my expression turned to that of horror as my other friend woke the last friend up. We all sat in silence and listened for a minute to try and determine the direction of the whistling. It could have been coming from the house. Maybe one of Chase's dad's caretakers decided to stay the night, which didn't usually happen. But it didn't take long to realize that the whistling was coming from the woods. And not only was it coming from there, but it was also getting closer to us. With that, we were out of there. It probably took us 15 seconds to get our shoes on and sprint to the front porch. We left everything in there, our snacks, pillows, sleeping bags, and DS's, and we didn't dare to go back. Under the light of his heavily illuminated driveway, which was basically a mini parking lot, we all gained a newfound confidence. At this time we managed to convince ourselves we weren't scared, so we got our airside guns from the garage and started taking trash and shooting into the woods, basically trying to intimidate or shoot whoever was out there. As we were yelling like a bunch of idiots, we weren't able to hear anything, but at some point when we cooled down, we listened intently and didn't hear anything. Knowing that, we were satisfied and went to sleep on the floor of his living room after playing a little Xbox. While that experience was creepy, what was really terrifying was what happened the next morning. We all woke up and started talking about how creepy everything that happened last night, and under the light offie, we made the walk down to the tent. As we got closer, we noticed something looked off about the tent. It had been completely trashed. The rain tarp had been mostly pulled off, and it looked like one corner of the tent had caved in, like someone broke one of the poles. Yeah, we had left in a hurry, but it felt hard to believe 4 10-year-olds could do this much damage. As we made our way to the front of the tent, my face dropped when I saw the true extent of the carnage. Everything inside was trashed. Chase's DS was broken, our snacks were spilled and stomped on, and some sleeping bags and pillows were thrown into the woods. Worst of all, one side of the tent was slashed, as if a maniac had a stabbing spree when he saw no one was inside. Despite all the bravado we had about scaring off whoever was in the woods the previous night and earlier that morning, all of us said shockingly little about it. The 4 of us packed up the tent, gathered what we could, and brought it back to the house. Then, our other 2 friends joined us as we hopped on our bikes and headed home. Nobody mentioned it to their parents, partly out of fear of trouble and partly to delegitimize what had just happened. Chase's family probably never would have used the tent again anyways, and I'm sure he just convinced his parents to buy him a new DS and said he lost his. After this sleepover, we all kind of naturally separated as friends. It was at the end of our summer of 5th grade, and Chase ended up going to a private middle school while the rest of us went to a public one, where we were then separated into different cliques. I never thought about the incident again until I ran into one of the other friends there recently when I was back in my hometown visiting family. After catching up, we exchanged numbers, and recently, after seeing people submitting their own scary stories, all of these memories came rushing back. I texted him to ask if he remembers that night, and he called me right after, laying out every single detail exactly as I remembered it. Immediately after, I spent the last half hour writing all this down in my phone. If there's any takeaway from this, it's that you should always stick to that instant gut instinct you get when something seems off. Because if it seems like it, it probably is. A creature suddenly charged at me from the woods. When I was about 19 years old and was going to college, I found a smoke spot. Most stoners on campus knew about this spot, as it was fairly hidden from most of the roads and paths the campus police liked to take to patrol campus. It was a bit of a steep hill, surrounded by trees and bushes that overlooked the highway behind campus. I would go there often at night, after all my classes were done for the day, and share a joint or bowl with my partner, at the time, now ex. He and I set up our spot on the hill that night. We brought our picnic blanket and smoke gear and were enjoying the night like any other. Lightly discussing the day and watching the cars go by on the highway below. Other than the noise from the highway, it was fairly quiet that night. Just the occasional chirp of a cricket or gentle breeze rushing through the trees. We were about halfway through our joint when I suddenly got this strange, uncomfortable feeling. I thought maybe it was just me being high and paranoid, but I had a pretty high tolerance and was a regular smoker by then. I had barely smoked through our joint and felt pretty clear-headed, but I didn't ignore the feeling. I told my ex we should finish up soon and leave, just because I was getting uneasy, and I usually trust my gut. A few minutes went by, nothing unusual happened. I just listened to the ambient noises of the cars and the bugs when, out of nowhere, it felt like things went silent for a moment, replaced quickly by the sound of rustling in the bushes. It was odd as I squinted to look down the hill into the trees and brush. I was expecting to see an animal, really. I was hoping to spot a deer or something similar, but I didn't see anything. Not a shadow. There was absolutely nothing going on. I started to get up and told my ex to grab our stuff because I wanted to leave. I turned my back to the tree line and started gathering my stuff into the false water bottle I hid my smoke gear in while my ex rolled up the picnic blanket. From behind me, the rustling quickly shifted into very loud and distinct footsteps. It sounded like 2 feet pounding into the ground, breaking twigs and branches underneath, rather than an animal running as they approached closer. My ex glanced at me and immediately fled. I assumed he was in a state of flight, while I, on the other hand, was in a state of combat. I clenched my fists and spun around as fast as I could but faced nothing, and the footsteps immediately silenced. It was like everything just returned to normal. There were no more footsteps or movements. There were no strange sounds or shadows to be heard. Just the trees and the cars and the bugs and my coward of an ex scrambling away up the muddy hill. I do believe something ran at me, but I don't know what. I do know, however, that my ex would let a demon kill me, so I guess it's good we're not together anymore. I have seen a thing in, or near, the woods on 3 separate occasions now. Each time I saw the thing, it was in a different state along the east coast of America, and each time the sighting was fleeting. I'm in my 30s now, and the sightings have several years between them. The first time I saw it was in high school, and this is most definitely the time I got the longest look at it. The second time I only caught a glimpse, and I'm pretty sure, but not entirely sure, it was the same thing. The third time I got a clear look at it from a distance, but it caught me so off guard that I stumbled as I was taking a step, and I lost sight of it. I have been calling it a thing because I have no idea what it is, and quite honestly, I don't even have a good guess either. It was not a Sasquatch, a wildman, a rake, a lizard person, or any other creature I have found through my incredibly frustrating recent internet research on the subject matter. Maybe a shapeshifter of some kind because the first time I saw it, the thing changed its form for sure. Yes, I said it changed its form. You can go ahead and leave now if you like. Before I begin telling you what happened, I would like to make it clear that I swear what you read here is the truth about what I saw, as best as I can remember. If you don't believe it, fine, whatever. I get that. This is the reason I am sharing what happened here, and it is the reason that I have never, and will never, tell anyone I might have to see in my daily life. I'm sure they would think I'm crazy or just desperate for attention because what I saw is downright absurd. Well, now that I have thoroughly destroyed any credibility I may have once had, I will tell you what I saw as best as I can. I've been thinking about how to explain this for a while, so I'll try to avoid a narrative tone. Well, now that I have thoroughly destroyed any credibility I may have once had, I will attempt to explain the details about what I saw as bluntly as possible with as vivid of a recollection as I have of the events. 1. First sighting, Southern New Hampshire, 2000 or 2001 summer probably, I don't remember exactly when, well after midnight. I am going to take some time to explain this first encounter in as much detail as I can recall. Even though it all happened so fast, literally lasting in total maybe 10 seconds, it is still the longest amount of time I have spent truly looking at the thing. I was walking to a friend's house from the apartment complex I lived in late at night. To get from one place to the other quickly, you had to cut through a small patch of forest, roughly 100 yards, that was technically someone else's property. A couple of times before, we had someone shine a light on us, and once he fired a shot in the air to try and scare us in an attempt to get us to stop cutting through, but it never did stop us. It did, however, teach me to be stealthier when cutting through, and so on this night, I was creeping very quietly through the trees as I went. The forest was in a valley between my apartment complex, some houses, and the neighborhood where my friend lived. The valley dipped down in the middle with a steep incline surrounding it, and so at first, I had to go down into the valley, and then at the end, I would walk up out of the valley, exiting the tree line right onto the street where his house is. After exiting the tree line, a person would find themselves standing on the side of the street, with the end of the road approximately half a mile to their right and the entrance to the neighborhood about the same distance to their left. The houses were spaced apart decently, so the night was very dark except for the area around the houses and a couple of light circles under the orange streetlights, of which there were very few for the amount of space. I got through the valley with no problem this time, and I got up some speed to go up the hill in front of me where the forest ended maybe 5 feet from the edge of the street, if even that far. At the exact moment I came out of the tree line and onto the edge of the road, something caught my eye to the left of me emerging from the woods across the street. It stumbled awkwardly out of the dark woods and into view right at the edge of the circle of orange light radiating down from one of the streetlights. At first and for just a brief moment, it looked like a shadow. However, I heard a sound coming from the dead leaves beneath its feet, and I quickly realized that it was not a shadow. Its body shape was like that of a starving child, maybe 3 feet tall, that you might see in a third world country, but its legs and arms were so thin that there appeared to be no way it could support the creature's body weight. It was dark, but from what I can remember, at the ends of its frail-looking limbs were just nubs, no hands and no feet that I saw. Its movements were the creepiest part, honestly, and they were the first thing that threw me off. I can't even really explain how absurd and unnatural its movements were or how it was standing on those tiny legs. It moved forward from the trees and toward the street extremely awkwardly with the couple of steps that I saw it take. It was as if it wasn't meant to walk, but it had found a way to do so anyway. The thing was roughly 2 or 3 feet tall with an enlarged light bulb-shaped head and a little belly in spite of how thin the rest of its frame was. In addition to its shape and motion, the thing seemed unreal mostly because it didn't seem to reflect any light at all when it stepped into the light of the street lamp. It seemed to lack a 3D shape, its body almost merging with its shadow, and I could only tell it was solid by how it moved and interacted with its surroundings. I froze in place instantly when I saw it, with my brain unable to even process what I was seeing. In a couple of steps, it exited the trees, stumbled across the patch of grass to the street, and then sort of fumbled forward toward a sewer drain on the side of the road. I'm not sure what I did, if anything, but as soon as it hit the curb, it rose back up and looked over at me. I couldn't see its face or anything at all, still just this bizarre black shape moving so unbelievably awkwardly. I really can't stress this enough, its movements were ridiculously uncoordinated. What happened next is what sent me fleeing into the woods with all of the cowardice that has kept me alive to this day. Upon seeing me, this malformed shadow child thing did this quick, twisted turn toward me, dropping down to all fours and becoming a much more animal-like shape when it did. I still find it difficult to describe the motion because it was so unnatural, but once its turn was complete, it transformed into something I can only refer to as a shadow dog, cat, or bear. I know that sounds crazy, but I can't describe it any other way than that. It stood on all fours like a predatory animal, but I couldn't make out any definition on it with the way it didn't catch the light that it was standing directly below. This thing, it didn't just go from being human-like to being a human on all fours. I mean, it genuinely became something else as far as I can tell. I thought about omitting this next part because it further undermines the event's credibility, but it happened, so here it is. As soon as the creature had hit all fours and was no longer humanoid, its eyes flashed yellow at me, and it let out a loud shriek, not a growl, not a bark, not a snarl, not an animal-like roar, or even a hiss, but a legitimate shriek that sounded like neither a person nor an animal. The sound started quiet and then rose quickly, almost as if it was winding up or under pressure and just painfully being forced out of the creature's mouth at great anguish. Its scream had a certain harshness to it, as if it might have had something seriously wrong with its vocal cords or it had just smoked a million cigarettes consecutively. I remember the thing had a weird, almost scared vulnerability to the sound it made, which contrasted the harshness and tone as well as the defensive stance the creature took. All this took place in just a few seconds, maybe 10 at most, from the time the thing exited the tree line to the time it turned, postured, shrieked at me, and sent me running without a single thought in my head right back into the woods. I did not stop, I did not look back, I did not try to be quiet through the forest, I just ran as fast as I could. That is correct, I was so scared I ran back into the dark, scary woods to get away, only realizing how dumb that was some time afterward. The sound it made chilled me to my core then, but now in hindsight, I think the flashing eyes bother me more than the sound because it seems so expected. The flashing/glowing eyes trope is precisely what I have heard in so many other people's stories. I never believed about mysterious creatures they claim to have encountered. I mean, because that is what scary things in the night do, right? They flash yellow eyes and make a scary shrieking sound at you, obviously. What else would they do? I never made it to my friend's house that night, and I never mentioned this to anyone ever since. I managed to forget about this experience pretty quickly, although I'm not sure how my life was high drama at the time, so I'm sure it is because I did something stupid and that took over my world. 2. Second sighting, Central Florida, 2006 spring, I believe, early night, 8 p.m. The second sighting is much briefer, and as I mentioned before, I am 90% sure it was the same thing, but I'm not entirely sure. I'll keep this short and tell you simply that I was out camping, went for a walk along a trail, and watched my girlfriend hop from rock to rock across the river. I heard a sound to my left, and when I turned to look, I saw an extremely thin, skinny, black, nubbed leg, possibly a tail, disappear behind a tree as if an animal were running away from something. I ran over this time, but I found nothing, and I didn't mention it to my girlfriend. No experiences or weird sounds that night and no more encounters for several years. If you like more detail about this one, you can attempt to email me with any questions, and I will try to remember. 3. Third sighting, Eastern Shore of Virginia, June 8, 2019, late night, 11 p.m. Well, finally, here it is, the reason I felt I had to put this out there and the reason I am so freaked out by this thing. It's not so much what happened last week, as it was another quick glimpse and nothing else, but instead, it is the fact that it happened again to me and, as far as I know, no one else. Last week I was at a party at a friend's house celebrating her birthday because she is one of those people in their 30s that still gets excited about those things. I don't drink, so I was not drunk, but, in the interest of total transparency, I have been known to partake in the occasional medicinal herbal supplement for recreational purposes. You can take that information however you like. My friend lives with her husband in a farmhouse surrounded by open fields for a couple of acres in any direction, surrounded, of course, by a thick forest. I had been there for a while, and the thing was the furthest thing from my mind. We were all just hanging out and rambling on about the usual inane bullshit. I decided that I wanted a smoke, and so I went out the front door and onto the porch. I stepped forward and went to step down the front steps to get a little more space, and as I did, I glanced up and out into the field in front of the house. There it was, roughly 50 yards out and bumbling through the field toward the trees. For a split second, I could see the unmistakable shape of this weird shadow child thing. It was just the same as before, large head and belly, unbelievably thin arms and legs, and again reflecting absolutely no light at all. I was mid-step when I glanced up and lost track of where I was stepping, causing me to fall forward. I managed to catch myself as I fell barely, and I must have made a sound when I did it because when I looked back up, the thing was on all fours quickly running like a dog off into the woods. I reiterate, this thing did not move on all fours like a person in any way, but it moved like an animal with knees bent backward. I was too far, and it happened too fast for me to tell if it had hands and feet this time. I started to walk out and look around a bit when someone came outside, and not wanting to tell anyone, I just went back to the party. I must have been distant the rest of the night because I couldn't get it out of my head this time. I ended up leaving the party relatively early and went home to start obsessing about it, as I have been for about a week now. So I am sufficiently freaked out by many things about what I have seen. Even if I discounted the second sighting, I got two brief but good looks at something that I cannot explain. One of the things that bothers me the most about this is, why me? Why, as far as I know, have I been the only one to see this thing? If it knows of me and is following me or something like that, then why does it seem surprised by my presence each time I've seen it and then enter a sort of fight or flight mentality? If it doesn't know of me, then why am I the only one to see this thing, and now in 3 different states years apart? I have so many questions. I'm writing this over a few days to make sure I have got all the details as best as I can remember, and I hope I'm not the only one that saw this creepy little ducker. What I saw that night was so unnatural. I never expected to see anything like it in my life. It honestly just did not belong in our physical reality, and it almost did not even seem to fit in the environment around it, as if it were something 2D superimposed into an authentic 3D background. I looked into shadow people videos and sightings, but I don't think this was that, as there was nothing ghostly about what I saw. It was there and had solid form. This ducking thing, it was so out of place, but at the same time I saw it there and heard it as well. I don't know what else to say about it. Each time, except the second, I could see enough of it that I could tell it was not somebody messing with me, and I could see enough of it to say it did not belong here in this world with us. My best guess at this point is that it and I crossed each other's paths in a possible interdimensional rift or time slip only because of how surreal the experience was. I know that sounds crazy, but it is all I have come up with to rationalize the fact that this thing did not fit into its surroundings in any way. It did not even look like it was made to move and get around in this world. The force of gravity should have for sure crushed its skinny legs under the weight of its body. It was like an eggplant on toothpicks. That is all that I have to tell, but I sincerely hope someone else saw something like this so I know I am not starting to lose it. At this point, I only want to know that I am not alone and that what I saw has some explanation, rational or not. I don't even care. Please, just give me something to go on. I need one reasonable answer from somewhere at this point because I know what I saw, and I can't get the way this thing moved or how dark it was out of my head.